Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban couldn't fully capture all the nuances and details of the original story, so today I'm going to tell you about the things that were left out. Details known only to those who've read the book. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Snape. Completely lost his composure. For those who only know the films, Snape comes across as a strict but ultimately fair professor. But in the book, he's much darker and far more cutting. While the film shows him mildly mocking Lupin's condition, the book portrays him more like a school bully, sarcastic, cruel, and way over the line. And those scenes where Snape heroically shields the kids, they don't exist in the book. On the contrary, when Sirius escapes, Snape storms into the hospital wing, practically foaming at the mouth with rage, and accuses Harry and Hermione of conspiring with a fugitive. Number 2. The Firebolt. In the film, it's simple. Sirius sends Harry a brand new broom, the Firebolt, at the end. But in the book, it's more interesting. Harry receives the broom at Christmas from an anonymous sender. Hermione suspects it may have come from Sirius Black and reports it to Professor McGonagall. The broom is confiscated for safety checks and Harry stops speaking to Hermione. This adds tension to their friendship and makes the story feel more realistic and emotionally layered. Number 3. Crookshanks and Sirius were friends. Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, not just a cute fluffball. In the book, he behaves very suspiciously, chasing Scabbers, who, as we know, isn't really a rat, and even befriending a large black dog who turns out to be Sirius Black in his Animagus form. This detail is left out of the film, but in the book it was so intriguing that fans developed a theory maybe Crookshanks used to be the Potter's cat. He certainly seems too clever for his own good. Number 4. Quidditch. The films always tried to avoid too much Quidditch. Expensive, complex and time-consuming. In Prisoner of Azkaban we get only one match, the first one. But in the book, Harry plays the entire season and ends up winning the Quidditch Cup. Plus, one brilliant scene was completely cut. Malfoy and his friends dress as Dementors to scare Harry during a match, but Harry casts a Patronus, and the prank backfires spectacularly. Number 5. Harry spent weeks at the Leaky Cauldron. In the film, Harry basically goes straight from the Dursleys to Diagon Alley, meets up with Ron and Hermione, and they all head to Hogwarts. Fast and simple. But in the book, Harry lives at the Leaky Cauldron for several weeks. Imagine freedom from the Dursleys, roaming Diagon Alley, experiencing real wizard life. Harry truly enjoys this time as an independent wizard, even if only for a little while. Number 6. Harry's father was an Animagus. One of the most emotional scenes is when Harry summons a powerful stag Patronus to save himself and Sirius from the Dementors. A beautiful moment, but the film doesn't explain why it's a stag. Book readers know his father, James Potter, was an Animagus who could turn into a stag. It's not a coincidence, it's a deep, magical bond between father and son. The film briefly explains that Peter and Sirius were animagi, but completely ignores James, even though it's one of the most touching details in the entire story. Number 7. The Marauders. The Marauders map. An incredible magical object that shows every corner of Hogwarts and tracks everyone's movements in real time. Harry gets it from the Weasley twins, just like in the movie. But then the film gets confusing. How does Lupin know about the map? Why does he know how to use it? The book gives the answer. Lupin was one of the Marauders, known as Moony. He created the map along with Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, Sirius Black, Padfoot, and James Potter, Prongs. It's not just a magical artifact, it's a symbol of Harry's father's youth and friendship. That detail is crucial for understanding the emotional core of the story. Number 8. The truth about Professor Trelawney's prophecy. During Harry's divination exam in Prisoner of Azkaban, he expected the usual nonsense from Professor Trelawney. Crystal balls, vague warnings, maybe a few mentions of death. But then something changed, her voice shifted, her eyes glazed over, and the room went still. In a deep, rasping tone, not her own, she spoke. "The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free." Harry froze. He didn't know what he'd just witnessed. Trelawney snapped back to her usual self, confused and cheerful, with no memory of what she had said. The moment passed, but the weight of it didn't. This wasn't one of her dramatic flourishes. It was a real prophecy. The only other one she had ever made, the first being the one that sent Voldemort after baby Harry. And now she was saying his servant would return that very night. The film skips over it. Trelawney is played for laughs, but in the book, this prophecy is a turning point. It warns Harry and the reader that something bigger is happening beneath the surface. And she's right. That same night, Peter Pettigrew escapes. The servant returns. Voldemort's rise begins. But unless you read the book, you'd never know that Sybil Trelawney, beneath all the shawls and sherry breath, had just shaken the future. Number 9, Harry met Cho Chang for the first time. Before the Yule Ball, before the awkward dates and heartbreak. There was a moment in Prisoner of Azkaban when Harry Potter first noticed Cho Chang. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something. She was the Ravenclaw seeker, fast and focused, with dark hair flying behind her as she soared through the air. During a Quidditch match, Harry caught a glimpse, not just of her skill, but of her smile. And for the first time, he felt his stomach turn for reasons that had nothing to do with nerves. The book doesn't linger on it. Just a few sentences. But they matter. It says, he couldn't help noticing that she was very pretty. That's it. Simple, honest. And suddenly, Cho Chang wasn't just a name. She was someone Harry watched, remembered, and would think about long after the game ended. The film leaves this moment out. It waits until Goblet of Fire to introduce her as if she appeared out of nowhere. But in the books, the seeds of that future were already being planted. This small detail gives depth to Harry's coming of age. He wasn't just a boy who lived, flying through danger and prophecy. He was a teenager, a boy in school, noticing someone for the first time. Not because she was famous, but because she was there, real, fast, smiling, and unforgettable. Number 10, Ron stood up for Hermione against Snape. Professor Snape didn't just dislike Gryffindors, he enjoyed humiliating them, especially Hermione. During one defense against the dark arts class in Prisoner of Azkaban, he snapped at her for answering too quickly. "You insufferable know-it-all," he said coldly in front of everyone. Hermione went silent. Her hand dropped. Her face turned red. The class froze, except for one voice, loud, furious Ron Weasley. "You asked a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?" Ron's words echoed across the classroom. It was brave, reckless, pure Gryffindor. Snape gave him detention on the spot. But Ron didn't back down. He muttered under his breath the entire time, and Harry could see it. He didn't regret a thing. This wasn't about points or house rivalry. It was loyalty. Ron stood up because no one else did. The film never showed it. Instead, it gave Ron the role of comic relief, the boy afraid of spiders, blurting awkward jokes. But in the books, he was more than that. He was the friend who spoke up when it mattered, the one who took detention so Hermione wouldn't take the insult alone. A small moment, maybe, but it told you everything about who Ron really was. Number 11, how Sirius escaped from Azkaban. Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban is one of the most daring in wizarding history. The film mentions it only briefly as a rumor whispered in fear. But the book tells the real story, the impossible story. Locked away for 12 years, Sirius was surrounded by Dementors, creatures that drained all joy and hope. But he had something most prisoners didn't: innocence. He knew he hadn't betrayed the Potters. That thought alone gave him just enough strength to stay sane. And he had a secret. He was an unregistered Animagus. In his Animagus form, a large black dog, his emotions dulled. Dementors couldn't sense animal minds the same way. So while others wasted away, Sirius waited. Watched. And then one day, the Daily Prophet slipped through the bars of his cell. On the front page, a photo of the Weasley family in Egypt, smiling, waving, and there, on Ron's shoulder, sat a rat with a missing toe. It was Peter Pettigrew. That single image broke the dam. Sirius knew Peter was alive, knew he was close to Harry, knew he had to act. "I saw him in the paper, I saw the rat," he tells Harry later. That was the moment he decided. He turned into the dog, slipped between the bars, swam through the freezing North Sea, and vanished. The movie skipped all of it. No prison cell, no transformation, no photograph, just a shadow in the night. But in the book, it's a moment of fierce clarity. Sirius didn't escape to be free. He escaped to protect the only piece of James he had left. Number 12, Why the Werewolf Attacked Sirius. When Remus Lupin transforms into a werewolf near the end of Prisoner of Azkaban, the film shows it as a sudden, terrifying moment. 1 second, he's a man. The next, a monster lunging at Sirius Black. But the movie never explains why. In the book, we learn the real reason. Lupin forgot to take his wolfsbane potion, a single mistake caused not by carelessness but by shock. That night, the truth about Peter Pettigrew came out. The betrayal, the lies, the weight of old grief, it pushed everything else aside. The wolfsbane potion wasn't just a remedy, it was Lupin's lifeline. With it, he could transform safely without hurting anyone. But without it, the curse took over. The book makes it clear he hadn't taken it, he forgot. The full moon was rising, and there was no time. In that moment, all his control was gone. He didn't see friends or enemies, only prey. That's why he attacked Sirius, not out of hatred, but instinct. It wasn't Remus, it was the wolf. This wasn't just a plot point, it was tragedy. Lupin had spent his whole life trying to be safe, careful, good, and in one night all of it crumbled. The scene in the book is filled with fear and guilt. Later he resigns from his post at Hogwarts. Not because Dumbledore asked, but because he couldn't forgive himself. "Parents will not want someone like me teaching their children," he says quietly, and walks away. The film missed this heartbreak. It gave us the fear, but not the sorrow. In the book, Lupin's transformation is a cruel reminder that no matter how kind or brilliant he is, the world will always see the monster. And on that night, just once, the monster won. Number 13, the real identity of Sir Cadogan. Sir Cadogan wasn't just a portrait. He was chaos in armor. After the fat lady's painting was slashed by Sirius Black, the Gryffindor common room needed a new guardian. And Dumbledore chose him, a tiny knight who lived in a painting of the North Tower, always galloping off on imaginary quests. The book describes him proudly challenging students to duels, waving a little sword and shouting, "Have at thee!" even when all they wanted was to go to bed. His presence became a running joke and a constant headache. He changed the password 3 times a day, sometimes 5. He insisted on formal titles and riddles. Lavender Brown once missed curfew because she addressed him as Sir Cadogan instead of Sir Knight of the Galloping Steed. Even Percy Weasley, always composed, was seen muttering curses under his breath. And all of Gryffindor began to wonder, was the fat lady really so bad? But in all this absurdity, Sir Cadogan did something else, something dangerous. One night he let Sirius Black into the tower. Not because he was fooled, not because he was tricked, but because Black had the password written on a scrap of paper that Neville Longbottom, poor forgetful Neville, had lost. In the book, it's a moment full of tension and guilt. Neville is humiliated, punished by McGonagall, and banned from knowing passwords ever again. It's one of his lowest points. But the portrait? He just shrugged. The gentleman had the correct code. The film left this entire subplot out. No Sir Cadogan, no misplaced password, no comic relief balancing the rising fear in the castle. Yet in the book, his presence adds both levity and danger. A reminder that in Hogwarts even the paintings are unpredictable, and even a chubby knight on a shaggy pony can change the course of a very real war. Number 14, the story of Neville Longbottom's parents. In the Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, there's no mention of one of the darkest, most tragic stories in the wizarding world, the fate of Neville Longbottom's parents. But in the book, that truth hits like a silent curse. In a quiet moment, inside the familiar bustle of Diagon Alley, readers learn something Harry doesn't expect. Professor Lupin later confirms it. Neville's parents, Frank and Alice Longbottom, were tortured into madness, not killed, broken. Frank and Alice were Aurors, some of the best. They stood up against Lord Voldemort during the First Wizarding War. After his fall, they became targets for revenge. Bellatrix Lestrange, one of Voldemort's most loyal Death Eaters, captured them along with 3 other followers. The group used the Cruciatus curse, Crucio, over and over again. In Lupin's words, they were driven insane, their minds shattered. This wasn't just background lore, it defined Neville. He didn't grow up with loving parents, but with a grandmother who pushed him hard, trying to shape him into someone strong. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry sees it for himself. At St. Mungo's Hospital, he watches Neville hand his mother a gum wrapper. She doesn't speak, just stares. And Neville, silently, pockets the wrapper. Not a word. But his eyes say everything. That small moment makes Neville's courage burn even brighter. He isn't just a shy boy fumbling with spells. He's a survivor. And the book plants that seed early. The film, though powerful in its own way, never shows the weight Neville carries, or the war that already stole his family. Number 15, the first meeting with Sirius in human form. The room was dark, broken only by the waning flicker of candlelight and the pale shimmer of moonlight filtering through broken boards. It was not the Hogwarts that Harry knew, no long tables, no safe stone corridors, no watchful portraits. This was the Shrieking Shack, a place wrapped in fear and legend, known as the most haunted building in Britain. But what haunted it tonight was not a ghost, nor a poltergeist, nor some cackling shadow. It was truth, gnarled and long buried, threatening to erupt all at once. Harry stepped into the room, heart pounding against his ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. His wand was clenched tightly, and every nerve in his body screamed to run, to fight, to protect. Behind him were Ron, wounded, pale, and Hermione, whose eyes flickered with terror and determination. And there, just ahead, rose the man they had been told to fear above all others, Sirius Black. This was not the moment the film chose to show. In the movie, Sirius's humanity arrives after the chaos, when truths are untangled and lines redrawn. But in the book, J.K. Rowling paints the scene with the raw urgency of a hunted animal's breath, the choking air of unresolved grief. This was the first time Harry saw Sirius Black, not as a name, not as a whisper, not as a face in the newspaper, but as a man, and what a man he was, or had become. Sirius stood before them not as the defiant, smirking traitor the Ministry had painted, but as a shadow of himself. His robes hung from him like skin that no longer fit, tattered and ghostly. His face was hollow, cheekbones sharp, eyes wild and deeply sunken. There was madness in him, but not the kind born of evil. This was the madness of isolation, the erosion of a soul left too long in darkness. He was staring at the floor, the book says, a mass of filthy, matted hair hung to his elbows. If eyes could speak, Sirius's eyes would scream. And yet, even in that deranged, skeletal shell, Harry saw something else, something far more dangerous than any spell or hex. He saw recognition. Sirius looked at him not with hatred, but with something deeper, something worse, as though he knew Harry before Harry had even opened his mouth. The moment was dense with 1,000 unsaid things. Harry had grown up with the knowledge that his parents were betrayed. He had replayed their deaths in his mind like a terrible lullaby. And the name that always surfaced, the name that danced like fire across the ruins of his past, was Sirius Black. Now that name had a face, and it was breathing. In that split second, the world was a fuse ready to detonate. But Rowling slows time here, stretches it like a tightrope. She lets Harry walk across his fury and grief, teetering with every word. "Why did you do it?" Harry demanded with every fibre of his being, but not in words. The weight of his wand told Sirius what his voice did not. And Sirius, broken, hollow, condemned Sirius, did not deny the accusation. He didn't shout or plead. Instead he waited for what he knew was coming, for the truth to claw its way up through years of silence. There was a brilliance in Rowling's writing here. A refusal to grant comfort, a choice to embrace discomfort, because the truth, when it comes, does not always wear clean robes. The stillness broke when Crookshanks, Hermione's ginger cat, leapt onto Sirius's shoulder, not with fear, but with the affection of an old friend. The detail is small, easily overlooked, but it's monumental. It hints that Sirius is not what he seems. Animals, Rowling reminds us, do not lie, and they do not love murderers. Still, it is not Crookshanks who changes the tone, but Remus Lupin. Moments later, when he bursts into the Shrieking Shack, pale and frantic, the axis tilts. The atmosphere crackles as he locks eyes with Sirius, but instead of hexing him, instead of arresting him as any sane professor might, he embraces him like a brother. And in that motion, everything shifts. The betrayal we thought we knew begins to unravel. Harry is not ready for it. The trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, are paralyzed by this violation of their expectations, and the reader too is thrown off balance. Could Sirius Black be innocent? The answer arrives slowly, through words that carry the weight of 13 stolen years. "I would have died before I betrayed them," Sirius says, and it is not a plea. It is a fact, carved from bone. His voice, hoarse from long disuse, is not filled with remorse, but rage. Not at Harry, but at Peter Pettigrew. Peter. The name is a fracture line across the chapter. For until this moment, Peter had been nothing but a martyr. A friend blown to bits by Sirius, leaving behind only a finger. But Sirius insists Peter is not dead. He is here, in this room, hiding, watching. The accusation sounds like madness until it doesn't, because Sirius knows things he shouldn't. He knows about Scabbers, about the rat that Ron has had for years, and slowly, with the precision of a man who has replayed this scene every day in his cell, Sirius begins to prove it. Here, Rowling's narrative technique is exquisite. She doesn't simply explain, she builds. With every fact revealed, the air in the shack grows heavier. Lupin joins Sirius in revealing the impossible, that Pettigrew, using an Animagus transformation, faked his death and has lived as a rat for over a decade. The room becomes a courtroom. The accused is unseen, the witnesses exhausted, the judge, Harry, torn between vengeance and confusion. There are no clean truths here, only pieces that begin to click into place. How Sirius escaped Azkaban, why he broke in, what he truly came for, not to kill Harry, but to protect him. It is Hermione who first asks the question none of them dare to, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" And Sirius, eyes burning with loss, explains the unthinkable. No one would believe him. The world needed a villain. And he became it. Number 16, Hermione slapped Malfoy. Of all the unforgettable moments in the Harry Potter book series, few are as deliciously satisfying as the one that didn't make it fully into the film. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, J.K. Rowling gives us an iconic, fiery moment of poetic justice, one that defines Hermione Granger not just as the cleverest witch of her age, but as a girl unafraid to stand up for what's right, even if it means crossing a line. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't polished, but it was necessary. Hermione slaps Draco Malfoy across the face, and for a moment, readers felt the universe balance itself. The films gave us a sanitized version. In the movie adaptation, we see Hermione pull out her wand and threaten Draco, who cowers and runs. But the books went further. There was no wand, no verbal warning. There was just fury and instinct and the flat sound of Hermione's hand connecting with Draco's cheek. For those who have only watched the films, the scene was memorable. But for those who have read the books, it was legendary. It happened shortly after the incident with Buckbeak, the proud and sensitive hippogriff who had the misfortune of crossing paths with Draco Malfoy's arrogance. During a Care of Magical Creatures class led by Hagrid, Buckbeak was introduced to the students as a majestic creature deserving respect. Harry, open-minded and cautious, made the proper bow and earned Buckbeak's trust. Draco, on the other hand, treated the magical beast like a spectacle for his amusement. His carelessness and mockery led to an injury, one he exaggerated for sympathy and revenge. That injury became Draco's ticket to manipulate the situation, weaponize his father's influence at the Ministry, and aim for Hagrid's downfall. His gloating about the possible execution of Buckbeak was unbearable, especially to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. But it was Hermione who snapped. She had been balancing the impossible, time-traveling to attend extra classes, managing endless homework, protecting Hagrid emotionally, and secretly researching ways to help Sirius Black. Her patience, always vast, had limits. It happened on a bright day near the edge of the castle grounds. Malfoy and his usual companions, Crabbe and Goyle, were lurking around, casting snide comments and laughing about Buckbeak's scheduled execution. They were mocking Hagrid, who had broken down in tears over what was happening, and worst of all, they were laughing about the creature itself. "You'd think that big oaf would know better than to trust a beast like that," Malfoy sneered, a wicked grin across his face. "It's going to be put down just like it deserves." Hermione had heard enough. She didn't speak. She didn't raise her wand. She didn't give Draco the dignity of a confrontation. What she gave him was something far more shocking, a slap that cut through the spring air like lightning. The book described it simply but powerfully. Hermione's hand flew across Malfoy's face with a crack. Malfoy reeled back, more stunned than hurt. Crabbe and Goyle froze, eyes wide. No one, not even Draco, expected that. He stumbled, staring at Hermione with a mixture of outrage and fear, and then, without another word, he turned and ran. The boy who so often had the upper hand, who weaponized cruelty like a sword, had been undone by Hermione Granger's bare palm. That single act did more than silence Draco. It reminded readers of the raw emotional stakes in the series. It wasn't about hexes or duels. It was about injustice, about friendship, about a young girl's breaking point. Hermione didn't just slap a boy. She struck at the core of entitlement, at the smug sneer that had gone unpunished too long. In that instant, readers saw the girl who stood up to trolls, outsmarted time, and would someday lead armies in a war against darkness. Rowling didn't glamorize the moment. There was no flourish. It came unexpectedly, yet it felt like it had been building for years. Malfoy had bullied countless students. He had mocked Harry's orphanhood, insulted Ron's poverty, and demeaned Hermione for being Muggle-born. The slap wasn't just about Buckbeak. It was an accumulation of wrongs, paid in full with one swift, glorious act. Ron's reaction, though humorous, underscored the shock of it all. In the book he stammered, "Hermione, you're brilliant." Hermione herself seemed surprised by her own fury. She wasn't a violent person. She lived by books and rules and careful logic. But that moment required something primal. It required action beyond reason. And Hermione answered that call. This wasn't the only time Draco was humbled, but it was the most viscerally satisfying. Seeing Hermione, often dismissed as the brain, take physical command of a situation revealed a truth. Courage takes many forms. Sometimes it's in the silent endurance of ridicule. Sometimes it's in challenging a corrupt system, and sometimes it's in a slap that echoes through a corridor. Number 17, Buckbeak was saved thanks to time travel. Of all the secrets hidden within the pages of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, one of the most brilliant and most overlooked by casual fans is the dangerous and precise rescue of Buckbeak the Hippogriff. In the film adaptation, the viewer sees Buckbeak vanish from his execution site and later serves as Sirius Black's salvation. But the true intricacy of that rescue, the razor-thin line between success and disaster, is only revealed in the novel. J.K. Rowling did not merely write a magical jailbreak, she crafted a tense, cerebral sequence that could rival any heist thriller. It was not a single action, but a careful ballet of timing, stealth, and magic, carried out by two underage wizards with a time-turner and nerves of steel. Harry and Hermione, sent back in time by Professor Dumbledore, were not just sent to help. They were given an impossible task: change history without changing it. The time turner did not offer immunity to mistakes. On the contrary, as Hermione had been taught, the consequences of being seen, or worse, interfering with one's own self, were catastrophic. "We're breaking one of the most important wizarding laws. Nobody's supposed to change time. Nobody!" she whispered, terrified yet determined. And yet the survival of two innocents, Sirius Black and Buckbeak, depended entirely on their ability to do exactly that. The first hurdle lay not in the act of freeing Buckbeak, but in reaching him without detection. Harry and Hermione knew that mere yards away their other selves were walking toward Hagrid's hut, oblivious to what lay ahead. They had to crouch behind trees, duck behind barrels, even flatten themselves against moss-covered stones to remain unseen. One misstep would create a paradox. One falling branch, one startled cry, could have undone the fabric of the day. The forest was alive with shadows, and every bird call made Hermione jump. Time travel in the wizarding world was not a convenience, it was a test of restraint. And then there was the matter of the execution itself. The film implies Buckbeak simply vanished moments before the axe fell, but the novel paints a more vivid picture. From their hiding place, Harry and Hermione could see the trio of executioners: Cornelius Fudge, the cowardly minister of magic, the executioner McNair, robe dark as night and axe glinting in the sunlight, and the quiet, solemn Dumbledore playing a dangerous game of deception. The tension in Hagrid's garden was suffocating. As Harry watched McNair raise the axe in the distance, his heart thundered in his chest. But it wasn't Buckbeak on the chopping block anymore. It was the silence that followed, the illusion that the act had been done, the brilliance of Dumbledore's acting, and Hagrid's desperate wailing to complete the charade. What the film glosses over is that Buckbeak's escape was not just a vanishing act. It was a quiet, careful operation performed in advance of the execution. "Harry, now," Hermione had whispered, and together they crept across the edge of the pumpkin patch, approaching the hippogriff with their hands raised. Buckbeak, chained to a post, eyed them warily. He was a creature of pride, not easily tamed. But Harry remembered the lesson from earlier that year. Bow first, show respect. When Buckbeak bowed back, they knew they had a chance. Harry quickly undid the rope, while Hermione kept watch for any sound from the approaching execution party. Getting Buckbeak to move without making noise was another feat. The creature had wings wider than a shed and talons sharp enough to gut a man. The mere rustling of his feathers could draw attention, but the three of them moved, barely breathing, deeper into the shadows of the trees. They found refuge behind a dense wall of sycamores where the executioners, minutes later, would be unable to see the truth. They would swing their axe and believe in death when death had never occurred. It looked like they were executing something, Harry would later think, stunned, but they weren't. The genius of Rowling's narrative is that she allows the reader to see the story unfold from both perspectives, the present and the past. While one version of Harry and Hermione sat in Hagrid's hut, bewildered by the pending execution, their future selves were already moving behind the scenes, rewriting the outcome. It's a dual-layered narrative that builds tension not from loud confrontations, but from silence. It's the type of writing that rewards a close reader, someone who traces every movement and sees the game being played beneath the surface. Harry's observation of himself is one of the more surreal moments in the book. Watching his other self sprint across the lawn toward the Whomping Willow, he feels both detached and, oddly, responsible. He knows that version of himself doesn't know he's being watched. "Is that what I really look like?" he muses briefly, but then focuses again. There was no time for reflection. They had to act with precision. They had to time Sirius's escape with the same flawless execution as Buckbeak's. And again, they had to do it silence. In the film, the emphasis is on spectacle. Buckbeak bursts into flight, Sirius jumps on his back, and they vanish into the night. But in the book, the emphasis is on suspense. Hermione and Harry don't simply rush to the tower window. They wait, breath held, until the moment is right. They sneak into the castle grounds, hide in shadows, and carefully watch as the guards move away. Even the act of calling up to Sirius, only once, with a whisper, had to be perfectly timed. Buckbeak responds instantly, flapping his wings just once, loud enough to be noticed, but soft enough to remain undetected by the wrong ears. Their success is not based on magic alone, it's based on observation, patience, memory. Harry remembers exactly where Sirius is being held. Hermione keeps track of every minute they have left before time catches up with them. "We've got exactly 10 minutes, she mutters, checking the hourglass of the time-turner with anxious fingers. Those minutes are a finite resource, slipping through their hands with every hesitation. Unlike the time-turner's illusion, time in reality is merciless. Number 18. Why Sirius laughed in Azkaban. When the Aurors dragged Sirius Black into Azkaban, the wizarding world recoiled in horror. The street was littered with the bodies of muggles blown apart by a single curse. A laughing man stood in the center of the carnage, staring at nothing, wild-eyed and howling with unearthly glee. This was the image seared into the public memory, not just a murderer, but a madman. And in the Ministry's records, in the Daily Prophet headlines, and in the whispered stories among Hogwarts students, that laughter became a symbol of Sirius Black's descent into madness. Only those who read The Prisoner of Azkaban closely know the truth. Sirius laughed not out of insanity, but because in a moment of searing pain he discovered a glimmer of clarity, the identity of the true traitor, and the beginning of his long, silent plan for justice. The books, far more than the films, peel back the mythology surrounding Sirius and allow the reader into the mind of a man trapped in a living nightmare. After James and Lily Potter were killed, the wizarding world believed Sirius had betrayed them. He had, after all, been their secret keeper, or so they thought. The book reveals a far more twisted arrangement. Sirius had suggested a decoy that their friend Peter Pettigrew should hold the Potters' secret. It was a stroke of strategic genius, or so Sirius believed at the time. By hiding the truth, he thought he had created an unbreakable line of defense for the Potters. What he hadn't accounted for was Pettigrew's cowardice and cunning. When Voldemort found James and Lily, Sirius knew instantly what had happened. That's when the laughter began. It's easy to misunderstand that moment if one only watches the films. Alfonso Cuarón's cinematic adaptation of The Prisoner of Azkaban is visually rich and emotionally charged, yet it omits crucial narrative threads from the book. One of the most vital losses is the context of Sirius's laughter. In the film, Sirius is depicted as emotionally unstable, even dangerous, until Harry finally learns the truth. But in the novel, J.K. Rowling lets readers understand that Sirius was neither mad nor broken in the way others believed. He was grief-stricken, yes, shattered by the loss of his best friend, but not unhinged. His laughter was a grim, painful eruption of realization. He had been outwitted not by Voldemort, but by the smallest and seemingly weakest of their group. The line in the book that explains Sirius's laughter is simple but profound. He tells Harry, "I meant to go after Peter. I meant to kill him, but little Peter got the better of me." That bitter acknowledgement, when seen in retrospect, gives his Azkaban laughter a new meaning. It was the laughter of someone who had played a game of shadows with death and lost. He had been so sure, so clever, so convinced of his own plan, and in a moment of horror he realized he had walked into Pettigrew's trap. The Aurors, who found him on the street, were not interested in explanations. All they saw was destruction, the wreckage of the street, the remains of innocence, and a wizard laughing amid the chaos. No one questioned the official story. Even Dumbledore accepted Sirius's guilt, at least outwardly. Without a trial, without a chance to speak, Sirius was sent to Azkaban. And yet, he did not go mad as others did. The laughter that haunted his arrival was not madness. It was his lifeline. Within the walls of Azkaban, Dementors drain every good memory, leaving prisoners with nothing but their worst fears and regrets. For Sirius, that meant reliving the deaths of James and Lily, the betrayal of his trust, and the sense of utter helplessness that followed. But he had one advantage. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was innocent. "It kept me sane," he later tells Harry. "That I was innocent. That was more important than anything else." It is a chilling statement, one that reveals both his strength and his suffering. In a place designed to strip away identity, Sirius clung to truth. But there was something else. He knew that Peter was alive. The Marauders' map, the mysterious magical parchment later gifted to Harry by Fred and George, had once been created by 4 young friends: Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, Remus Lupin, Peter Pettigrew, Sirius Black and James Potter. Their friendship had been forged in the halls of Hogwarts through secrets, transformations and shared rebellion. For Sirius, that bond was sacred. The betrayal wasn't just strategic, but it was personal. The laughter then becomes a final moment of clarity in a collapsing world. As Pettigrew vanished into the sewer and Sirius stood surrounded by smoke and death, he laughed not because he had lost everything, but because he had finally seen the truth. What the films fail to convey is that this realization was not the end for Sirius. It was the beginning. In the book, when he recounts these moments to Harry and Hermione, there is no madness in his tone. There is pain, anger, and a slow-burning hunger for justice. The memory of Pettigrew's betrayal was the coal that burned inside him, keeping him alive in Azkaban. He transformed into his Animagus form, a great black dog, not only to hide from the Dementors, but to retain control over his mind. In animal form, he felt less human and thus less vulnerable to despair. It was another piece of brilliance unspoken in the film, but woven with care into the text. When he saw the newspaper photo of Ron Weasley with his pet rat and recognized Peter's Animagus form, the laughter returned in a new shape. This time it was quiet, determined. Sirius's mind sharpened. He had been waiting, watching. His plan to escape was born not from desperation, but from a single thread of vengeance tied to that first, hollow laugh. His escape was the conclusion of a promise he made in that instant on the street, the promise that he would find Peter again. To understand Sirius Black is to understand contradictions. He is reckless but loyal, sarcastic but sincere, broken but whole. His laughter in Azkaban becomes the ultimate symbol of his complexity. It is not the laughter of joy nor the cackling of a madman. It is the sound of a man who has seen everything he loves destroyed and still, somehow, found a reason to survive. Rowling's writing in these scenes is restrained but potent. She allows Sirius's story to unfold in fragments, letting readers piece together the truth through Harry's eyes. When Harry finally hears the full account, the pieces fall into place. "You should have realized," Sirius says, "if Voldemort didn't kill me, I'd find a way to escape." That statement speaks volumes. It tells us that from the moment of his imprisonment, Sirius had been waiting, biding his time, believing, knowing that the moment would come. His laughter then is prophecy. The Ministry could not understand it. The guards at Azkaban could not explain it. But readers of the book know what that laughter meant. It was the first step in a silent journey, the beginning of a revenge that would take 12 long years to manifest. For Sirius, it was not enough to survive. He needed to be ready. He needed to be watching. And when the time came, he needed to act. Even in his conversations with Harry, Sirius rarely revisits those early days in Azkaban. But when he does, the tone is always clear. He speaks not with the voice of a victim, but of a man who endured. He doesn't ask for sympathy. He wants Harry to understand the stakes, to see beyond appearances. And that, too, is what makes the book so powerful. Readers are asked to rethink everything they thought they knew. The man who laughed like a maniac in the street turns out to be the most loyal of friends, the most tormented of protectors. The tragedy is that the world never saw the truth. Even after his escape, Sirius remained a fugitive. His innocence, though known to a handful, was never publicly acknowledged. He was forced to hide in shadows, to watch as others fought the battles he longed to join. But he never lost that fire. His laugh, and the one that began in grief and revelation, never truly died. It became part of him. It was not a loss of sanity. It was the spark of resistance. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling does more than tell a story about magic and monsters. She tells a story about what it means to endure, about the difference between truth and perception, about how one moment of understanding, even one as strange and terrible as a burst of laughter amid death, can define a life. Sirius Black's story is not just one of tragedy, it's a story of a man who refused to be broken, even when the world had already written him off. And all of that begins with the laugh that no one understood, until you read the book, number 19, Why Peter Pettigrew Was Spared. Of all the pivotal moments in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, one remains deeply misunderstood by those who only watched the film, the reason Peter Pettigrew was allowed to live. While the movie shows Harry stopping Sirius Black and Remus Lupin from killing the traitor, it fails to reveal the profound moral choice that underpins his decision. The book, however, offers something far more intricate and meaningful, a choice that resonates through the rest of the series, culminating in a moment that ultimately saves Harry's life in the final book. It's a choice not driven by mercy, but by a conscious refusal to descend into vengeance. The Shrieking Shack is where it all unfolds. It is a place haunted by memories, both literal and emotional, a ruin filled with howls and hidden truths. Here, Harry learns the full extent of Peter Pettigrew's betrayal, how he, a cowardly Animagus, sold James and Lily Potter to Voldemort, faked his own death, and framed Sirius Black. The anger in that room is palpable. Sirius, wrongly imprisoned for 12 years, wants justice, raw and immediate. Lupin, gentle but shaken, agrees. But Harry, just 13, stands at a crossroads. The book makes it painfully clear that this is not a simple good guy moment. It is not sentimentality. It is legacy. Harry's reasoning is rooted in something the film glosses over. He recalls the memory of his father not as a warrior, but as someone who lived by principle. I'm not doing this for Pettigrew. I'm doing it because I don't reckon my dad would have wanted them to become killers. Just for you, Harry says in the book. These are not the words of a child trying to be noble. They are the judgment of someone who has seen darkness and chooses, despite everything, to remain in the light. In stopping the murder, Harry separates himself from the cycle of revenge that Voldemort thrives on. This is not the end of Pettigrew's story. Allowing him to live creates a magical debt, something ancient and binding in the wizarding world. The reader learns later, in The Deathly Hallows, that life debts have profound consequences. It is in the cellar of Malfoy Manor, years after that night in the Shrieking Shack, that Pettigrew's moment of reckoning arrives. Harry is at his mercy, unarmed and cornered, but Pettigrew hesitates. His silver hand, a gift from Voldemort, turns on its master, strangling him before he can betray Harry a second time. Dumbledore had predicted this, cryptically noting that Harry had shown mercy to Pettigrew, and the consequences of that are not yet known. They are known now. This cause and effect relationship, the unbroken arc from the Shrieking Shack to Malfoy Manor, is completely lost in the film adaptation. On screen, Harry's decision is framed as moralistic simplicity. He is a good person who doesn't kill, but that's not the story Rowling tells. In the book, Harry is not sparing Pettigrew out of kindness. He does it because he refuses to become the kind of person who kills for justice. He understands that Pettigrew deserves to die, but also that Sirius and Lupin deserve to live without murder on their hands. Harry is thinking beyond the moment. It is a choice about legacy, not leniency. The concept of a life debt has deep roots in magical lore. Rowling doesn't explain it in a single paragraph. She threads it through the series with subtlety. When Snape owes James Potter his life, it binds him in complicated ways that affect his loyalty to Dumbledore and his protection of Harry. When Harry saves Pettigrew, he unknowingly triggers another bond, one that cannot be broken without fatal consequences. This again is omitted from the movie, which opts instead for action over nuance. The truth is, magical debts are sacred. They bend the will, touch the soul, and in Pettigrew's case turn a hand of silver against its own heart. The tragedy of Peter Pettigrew lies in his own undoing. He is not a bold villain like Bellatrix Lestrange or a calculating force like Lucius Malfoy. He is a coward, driven by fear and self-preservation, but it is this very cowardice that makes his story so devastating. When his moment comes to repay the debt, he cannot fight it. He is the kind of man who flees from battles, yet dies by the very magic born of a moment he barely understood. It is poetic justice, and it completes the arc that began in the Shrieking Shack. Only readers of the book can feel the weight of this design. Harry's decision is also significant because it shows how he navigates his moral compass without adult guidance. Dumbledore is not there. There is no speech from a mentor about right and wrong. Harry must choose, and he does so with more wisdom than many adults would. He recognizes that vengeance poisons the soul, even when it feels justified. The Harry of Prisoner of Azkaban is still learning, but this moment shows he's already beginning to lead with principle, not passion. Sirius and Lupin, by contrast, are overwhelmed. They are older, more experienced, but emotionally wrecked by betrayal and loss. Their urge to kill Pettigrew is understandable, even expected. But Harry's intervention pulls them back from the edge. He saves not just a life, but their dignity. He protects their future. Lupin later becomes a father figure to Harry. Sirius becomes a symbol of freedom. Neither could have played that role if they had spilled blood in vengeance that night. This, too, is part of Harry's legacy, not only preserving Pettigrew's life, but rescuing his friend's humanity. When Harry invokes his father's memory, it becomes clear that the choice is about more than Pettigrew. It's about James Potter's legacy, the kind of man he was, and the kind of man Harry wants to be. James was a fighter, but he was also just and loyal. He would not have killed a defenseless man, even one as vile as Pettigrew. In choosing to act as his father would, Harry affirms his lineage not by blood, but by values. That moment, subtle and quiet, says more about character than any battle scene ever could. The moral choices in Prisoner of Azkaban are some of the most complex in the series. The book does not give easy answers. It does not paint characters in black and white. Pettigrew is loathsome but alive. Sirius is noble but fallible. Harry is a child but wise beyond his years. These contradictions are what make the story resonate. They show that in the wizarding world, as in the real one, morality is not about winning or losing. It is about choosing who you want to be when no one is watching. Had Harry chosen differently, the entire series would have shifted. Pettigrew's death would have robbed Voldemort of his servant, yes, but it also would have broken the magical contract that later binds him to Harry. The cellar scene in Deathly Hallows would end with betrayal, not redemption. Harry might have died there, alone and unavenged. The story reminds us that mercy, though often seen as weakness, can be the most powerful form of resistance. It bends the arc of fate in unexpected ways. It is no accident that Dumbledore praises this act. Though he is absent from the Shrieking Shack, his fingerprints are all over Harry's philosophy. Dumbledore has always warned against the easy path. He believes in second chances, even when the recipient seems undeserving. It is the same mindset that lets Snape live. It is the same thinking that spares Draco Malfoy. Harry, in this moment, becomes a true student of Dumbledore, whether he knows it or not. The omission of this moral weight from the film is more than just a screenwriting shortcut. It strips the story of its ethical core. Without this choice, Harry becomes just another protagonist who spares a villain because he's better than that. But in the book, his reasoning is grounded in emotional intelligence, family legacy, and magical consequence. He is not just sparing a life, and he is shaping the future. He's rejecting the idea that justice requires blood. Rowling's use of magical lore, debts, prophecies, curses, is not just world-building. It is a mirror for the soul. Pettigrew's life was spared by Harry, but in doing so, Harry unknowingly wrote a law into the very fabric of fate. That law returns when he needs it most. Magic in Rowling's world is not just power, it is choice, bound to consequence. This is why Pettigrew's silver hand betrays him. It was forged from Voldemort's will, but it answers to a higher truth. Pettigrew's final moments are silent in the book. He chokes, falls and dies, the silver hand clenched around his own throat. No speech, no redemption arc, only the grim finality of a debt paid. It is brutal, but just, and it only makes sense if you remember the boy in the Shrieking Shack, holding back the hand of vengeance and speaking of a father he never truly knew. For readers, this is the moment Harry begins to transcend the narrative of the boy who lived. He becomes something else. The boy who chose. That identity, forged in a haunted house with blood on the walls and secrets in the shadows, is what carries him through the rest of the series. It prepares him to face death, to lead others, to forgive, to let go. And so what the film reduces to a moment of kindness is, in truth, a cornerstone of Harry's destiny. It is an act that saves not just one life, but many. It is proof that in a world of wands and werewolves, sometimes the strongest magic is the kind you don't cast, the kind that comes from within. The choice to spare Peter Pettigrew is not about Pettigrew. It is about what kind of man Harry Potter is, and what kind of world he wants to build after the war is over. Number 20. Lupin knew Peter was alive. In the swirling tapestry of Hogwarts' third-year chronicles, one thread is almost always left untouched by the casual observer, the quiet, razor-sharp suspicion that Remus Lupin harboured long before the climactic events in the Shrieking Shack. Buried beneath layers of loyalty, guilt, and a painful past, Lupin's knowledge of Peter Pettigrew's true fate stands as one of the most quietly explosive elements of The Prisoner of Azkaban. It is not a moment handed down to us by the film adaptation, which chose to omit this tension altogether. Instead, it is nestled within the pages of the novel, an invisible string that begins to pull taut long before Sirius Black ever breaks into Gryffindor Tower. It all begins with the map, the Marauders map. Created in their school days by Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, the map was a masterpiece of magical mischief, capable of revealing the exact location of every person in Hogwarts. When Fred and George Weasley pass the map on to Harry, they unknowingly unleash a silent alarm in the mind of its creator. For Harry begins using it often, oblivious to the hidden danger it contains. It is while using this map that Harry sees something that should be impossible, the name Peter Pettigrew, alive and walking the corridors. Harry is confused, but shrugs it off, believing the map to be malfunctioning. But Lupin knows better. He sees the map again much later, when Harry, Ron, and Hermione rush off to Hagrid's cabin before Buckbeak's scheduled execution. Lupin confiscates it, and when his eyes fall upon the names dancing across the parchment, he stops cold. It was the sight of Peter Pettigrew on the map that convinced him something was very wrong, Rowling writes. Remus Lupin, who had mourned Peter Pettigrew for over a decade, could not mistake the name. He had not simply forgotten about Wormtail. No, the moment he saw it, the illusion shattered. Pettigrew was alive, and if Peter was alive, then Sirius Black could not be the traitor. This realization is a seismic shift within Lupin's psyche. His internal compass, always burdened by self-doubt and isolation, points once more toward loyalty to old friends. Yet the revelation is also terrifying. Peter Pettigrew had been hiding for 12 years, presumed murdered by the very man the Ministry had branded a traitor. And where, according to the map, was Peter? At Hogwarts, living under their noses. The brilliance of Rowling's narrative choice here is in Lupin's restraint. He does not confront Harry immediately, nor does he share this horrifying revelation with Dumbledore. Instead, he waits, watches, and plans. And when the trio are caught sneaking out to see Hagrid, when Crookshanks leads Sirius into the tunnel under the Whomping Willow, Lupin acts, not out of randomness, but with deliberate purpose. He knows something is about to happen. Because Peter Pettigrew, whom everyone believes to be dead, is inside the Shrieking Shack. The novel notes this moment with haunting clarity. "I saw him on the Marauders map. I saw him on it last night." Lupin's voice is not one of shock, but of grim understanding. He doesn't question the map's truth. He helped design it. Its magic was his. That map was not lying. This quiet but devastating realization is never once mentioned in the film, which instead has Lupin arriving by chance. The Shrieking Shack becomes a stage for Sirius Black's wild confrontation with the trio, and Lupin merely happens upon the scene. The map, the reason for Lupin's entrance, is dismissed, but in the book, this detail is the fulcrum on which the plot pivots. It transforms Lupin from a kindly but passive professor into a man carrying the weight of old betrayals, desperately trying to connect the dots before more harm is done. The map is not simply a magical tool in this context, it is a mirror reflecting the buried sins of the past. In seeing Peter's name, Lupin confronts the idea that he was wrong to ever suspect Sirius. That realization is both tragic and redemptive. Consider how Rowling builds the tension in Lupin's character, even before this point. He refuses the Defense Against the Dark Arts position for years, not because he lacks skill, but because he fears exposure. When he finally accepts, it is not because he has nothing left to lose, it's because Dumbledore, at long last, convinces him he still has something to give. But Lupin walks through the year with ghosts pressing down on him. He teaches Harry the Patronus charm not only because it is useful, but because he understands what it means to face darkness from within. So when the truth about Peter begins to surface, Lupin is forced to confront not only the lies others have believed, but the ones he himself has accepted. That Sirius could have betrayed James and Lily, his best friends, that Peter could have been a victim. All of it begins to crumble under the weight of evidence written in magical ink on old parchment. And what of Peter? The coward, the traitor, the man hiding in plain sight. He has spent 12 years as Ron Weasley's pet rat, Scabbers. This grotesque disguise is more than just clever concealment, it is a damning testament to the failures of the adults in Harry's world. Lupin's discovery should have been impossible. And yet it happened because he trusted the map, he trusted what he and his friends had built. This single moment, Lupin staring down at the name Peter Pettigrew dancing across the Marauders map, is the moment that changes everything. Without it, he would not have followed the trio, he would not have arrived at the Shrieking Shack, he would not have helped reveal the truth to Harry. Lupin's entire role in the story hinges upon this silent act of observation and the brave decision to believe what he saw. The narrative power of this moment is amplified by the quiet way Lupin handles it. He doesn't burst in shouting accusations. He moves with the somber weight of someone who has known too much pain to take truth lightly. When he and Sirius finally corner Peter and force him into his human form, Lupin's voice is calm but cold. "You should have died rather than betray your friends," he says, echoing a moral code so rarely heard in the world of adult wizards. There's also an immense sense of betrayal wrapped in Lupin's emotions, not just at Peter, but at himself. He had believed the lie. He had let 12 years pass without questioning it. And now, faced with the truth, he acts not with vengeance, but with resolve. That's what makes Lupin different. He's not just another adult character. He's one of the few who carries both the sorrow and the wisdom of war. What the film missed, and what the book honors, is that Lupin's decision to act was not coincidental. It was deeply rooted in loyalty, pain, and an almost unbearable sense of loss. When he sees Peter's name, he is forced to re-evaluate the entire narrative of his adult life. Everything he believed about the deaths of James and Lily is torn apart. And, still, Lupin does not crumble. He steps forward into the fire, into the truth. He joins forces with Sirius, his once estranged brother in arms, to seek justice, not revenge. They could have killed Peter. They had the chance, but they chose instead to bring the truth into the light. If he's back at the castle with Snape, "We lose our chance," Sirius growls, but it's Lupin who keeps them grounded. The Marauders map becomes, in this context, not just a whimsical invention of mischievous schoolboys, but a relic of loyalty, a piece of memory that refuses to lie. It becomes the proof of Peter's existence, the harbinger of justice long delayed, and Lupin, Moony, its co-creator, becomes the man who answers its call. This detail also deepens the tragedy of Lupin's eventual fate. He is one of the few characters who always seeks the truth, who always chooses compassion over destruction, and who still suffers a bitter end. But in The Prisoner of Azkaban, for one brief moment, he is vindicated. He follows the map, confronts the ghost of his past, and saves the future of the boy his best friend died to protect. And in the end, this hidden piece of the puzzle, Lupin's knowledge, his courage, his clarity, is what elevates the novel above its cinematic adaptation. It adds layers of tension, character development, and emotional depth that no viewer could possibly experience without having read the book. It is the proof that Remus Lupin was never just a kind professor. He was a survivor, a soldier, a friend, and most importantly, he was the man who saw a name on a map and chose to believe it meant the world was not as it seemed, that maybe, just maybe, the past still had something left to say. Number 21, Hermione hid the time turner all year. Of all the secrets buried in the pages of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, few are as quietly powerful as the truth behind Hermione Granger's impossible schedule. While the film adaptation treats the time turner like a last-minute plot twist, suddenly appearing to reverse time and save lives, the book plants this magical device in Hermione's life from the very beginning of the school year. Hidden in plain sight, it is a symbol not of convenience but of sacrifice. For nearly 10 months, Hermione bears the burden of time manipulation, her brilliance shadowed by isolation, exhaustion, and secrecy. It is a detail that reveals more about her character than any clever spell or perfectly written essay. From the very first weeks of her 3rd year at Hogwarts, Hermione's schedule seems off. She appears at arithmancy, divination, muggle studies, and care of magical creatures, even when these classes occur simultaneously. Ron Weasley notices. So does Harry, but every time they ask, she deflects. Her bag always seems heavier than it should be. She vanishes from conversations and reappears without explanation. This strange pattern continues for months, cloaked in silence. For readers paying attention, it becomes clear something isn't right. Rowling never hands the answer over easily. She allows us to live with the mystery, just as Ron and Harry do. Hermione, usually so direct and proud of her achievements, refuses to brag about her impossible schedule. She retreats into herself, growing more tense and snappish as the year wears on. When Ron finally exclaims, "How are you getting to all your lessons?" she snaps, "I've got a very good timetable." But beneath the surface of that irritation is exhaustion, mental, emotional, magical. There's a pivotal moment that showcases just how thinly stretched Hermione has become. In Chapter 15, the Quidditch final, she explodes at Ron in the Gryffindor common room. He accuses her cat, Crookshanks, of eating his rat Scabbers. It's a silly argument on the surface, but Hermione's reaction is uncharacteristically harsh. She shouts, leaves the room in tears, and avoids her friends for days. It's more than just about a cat or a rat. It's the breakdown of someone carrying an invisible, impossible weight. Only much later does the truth emerge, and even then it is Professor McGonagall who finally explains it to Harry. In Chapter 21, Hermione's Secret, McGonagall reveals that Hermione had been given special permission by the Ministry of Magic to use a time turner for academic purposes. The decision was not made lightly. She's been turning it back every day so she could do extra lessons, McGonagall tells Harry. She's been getting awfully tired. That line, awfully tired, carries more weight than it first appears. For an entire academic year, Hermione has been stealing hours from her own sleep, doubling the length of her days and living each moment twice. In a world where every magical object comes with a price, the time turner exacts its toll, not in gold or blood, but in sanity. Every time Hermione rewinds her day, she re-enters a world where she must stay out of sight, avoid her past self, and never tell anyone what she's doing. The psychological pressure is immense. Hermione must remember everything twice. She lives through the same conversations, sees the same corridors, breathes the same air, but always in secret. Every smile is worn, every class is another performance, and the rules are ironclad. She must never let her past and future selves meet. The consequences, as the book hints, could be catastrophic. This isn't just a clever trick, it's a ticking bomb. What's so striking is how little Hermione complains. She is the brightest witch of her age, but she is also the most disciplined. She understands that the time-turner is a privilege, a dangerous one, but still a gift. It is Professor McGonagall who vouched for her, who wrote to the Ministry, who believed that Hermione could be trusted with a device powerful enough to unravel time. That trust becomes a burden Hermione carries silently, even when it begins to unravel her health and her friendships. There's a powerful irony here. Hermione is a character defined by truth, structure, and order. Yet for a whole year she lives in contradiction. Her academic success is built on a lie of omission. Her friendships suffer because she cannot explain herself, and all of it is sanctioned by the very authority she so often upholds. The stress begins to show in the ways she reacts, impatient, sleep-deprived, and irritable. She is no longer just the overachiever. She is a girl pushed to the edge. When Dumbledore instructs Harry and Hermione to use the time-turner at the end of the book, the moment is loaded with meaning for Hermione. For the first time, someone else will share the burden she has borne alone. And Harry, unaccustomed to the rules and limits of time travel, must trust her to guide him through this strange, parallel world. Suddenly, Hermione is not just a student with a magical gadget. She is a veteran of time itself. During their journey back through time, Hermione displays calm and control. She knows how it works. She reminds Harry not to be seen, not to act too soon. Her experience, so carefully hidden, becomes their only hope. When she and Harry rescue Buckbeak and Sirius Black, it's a triumph not just of bravery, but of her year-long endurance. She has learned to live with paradox and fear, to hide in shadows while working toward light. There's a chilling beauty to the fact that the entire Hogwarts staff knew what she was doing. Professor McGonagall arranged it, the Ministry signed off on it, Dumbledore surely knew, and yet Hermione was left to struggle alone. It's a quiet kind of betrayal, one wrapped in admiration. They trusted her so much they allowed her to suffer in silence. This story is completely absent in the film. On screen, the time-turner appears like a miraculous cheat code, a dazzling plot twist, a perfect resolution. But in the book it is something far darker and more complex. The time-turner is not just a tool, it's a character in itself. It shapes Hermione, isolates her, strengthens her, and nearly breaks her. It is one of the most compelling metaphors Rowling ever created. There's also something deeply symbolic in the way the time-turner is worn, around the neck, like a secret weight. Hermione literally carries time with her, coiled like a noose or a charm, depending on how you see it. Every time she turns it, she rewinds her soul a little more. In that sense, the time-turner is the opposite of the Marauders map. Where the map reveals, the time-turner conceals. Where the map is playful, the time-turner is deadly serious. The only moment Hermione truly loses control is when she attacks Draco Malfoy after Buckbeak is unfairly sentenced. This impulsive act, punching Draco in the face, is often seen as a triumph of bravery. But it can also be read as the breaking point of someone who has spent too long suppressing herself. It is the first spontaneous thing she does all year, and it comes from a place of righteous anger. The time-turner taught her discipline, but it also cost her emotional release. When she finally returns the time-turner at the end of the year, there's no ceremony, no fanfare. It's simply taken away. She tells Harry and Ron, "I've handed it in. Loads of people have been hurt with them." The statement is brief, but profound. Hermione, who risked her health and peace for the sake of knowledge, realizes that some magic isn't worth the cost. She could have kept it. She could have continued her impossible pace. But she chooses rest. She chooses normalcy. In a world obsessed with academic success and magical talent, Hermione's story is a quiet rebellion. She doesn't burn out in flames. She walks away, quietly, with wisdom earned through pain. That is the true arc of the Time Turner, not just a magical object, but a lesson in boundaries, in pressure, and in the hidden costs of perfection. It's a story only readers know, tucked between the lines and hidden behind the scenes. By giving Hermione the Time Turner, Rowling offered more than a plot device. She gave readers a portrait of a young woman stretched to her limits, succeeding not by chance, but through painful endurance. And by ending the story with Hermione's decision to give it up, Rowling also reminds us that even the most dazzling magic comes at a price. For those who've only seen the movie, The Time Turner is a twist. For those who've read the book, it is a tragedy hidden in plain sight. Number 22, why Lupin had a magical trunk. Of all the details lost in translation from page to screen in the adaptation of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, few are as quietly significant as the curious case of Remus Lupin's enchanted suitcase. The film gives viewers a glance at the object, dusty, worn, seemingly nondescript, but never delves into its peculiar construction or origin. Those who have read the book, however, understand that this is no ordinary trunk. It is a quiet monument to Lupin's skill, preparation, and life on the margins of the wizarding world. It is, in many ways, a reflection of the man himself. The third book in the series introduces Professor Lupin as a surprising relief after the more flamboyant Lockhart. He arrives at Hogwarts under a cloak of shabbiness, exhausted and barely able to rouse himself to conduct classes. But it quickly becomes clear that behind the worn robes and pale features is a mind of extraordinary depth and a heart tempered by hardship. Lupin's suitcase is one of the earliest signs that he is far more than he appears. Unlike previous professors who brought little more than bravado or eccentricity, Lupin arrived prepared, dangerously so. The suitcase, described in J.K. Rowling's text as covered in scratches and bearing his initials, isn't just a container of clothes or teaching materials. It is a magically fortified, trap-laden arsenal, sealed with enchantments designed to detect and defend against threats. In the book, this is subtly hinted at during his classes and moments of transition. Rowling writes, Professor Lupin's office door was ajar. Inside, he was packing a battered old suitcase, the lid of which kept opening and snapping shut of its own accord, as though it didn't approve of what Lupin was doing. This sentence, simple at first glance, signals the presence of enchantments. This is no passive object. The suitcase acts with will. Its snapping lid reveals that the trunk is charmed, not only with mundane locking spells, but with personality, a built-in defense mechanism, perhaps derived from Lupin's need to guard his belongings. Unlike Moody's trunk in Goblet of Fire, which concealed an entire prison, Lupin's case was designed for escape and survival, not captivity. A man who has spent much of his life hunted, discriminated against, and impoverished would learn early on to protect what little he has. Though Rowling never dedicates a chapter to the suitcase itself, Lupin's mastery of defensive magic is evidenced throughout the book. His first class with third-year students involves not just theory but direct application. He releases a boggart from a wardrobe and teaches the class to fight fear itself. No other teacher before him had dared to expose the students to such real magic in such a controlled, instructive environment. Ridiculous becomes not just a spell but a rallying cry of empowerment. The suitcase is an extension of this philosophy. Knowledge is power, but preparedness is survival. Later, when Harry asks Lupin why he didn't allow him to face the boggart, Lupin's response, that he feared it would turn into Lord Voldemort, conceals something deeper. Lupin was testing the class not just for talent, but for trustworthiness. He was always aware of how dangerous exposure could be, to himself as a werewolf, and to students who might discover the truth. His suitcase may well contain more than just garlic sprays and anti-poltergeist wards. It may have included wolfsbane preparations, silver safeguards, and coded documents on dark creatures. Lupin was not just a professor, but he was a field agent in hiding. The enchantments on the suitcase mirror the same complexity found in the Room of Requirement or Dumbledore's office, magical spaces responding to need, intent, and threat. It is possible that the suitcase was crafted with similar principles. Though Hogwarts provided security, Lupin had lived a life where nothing could be taken for granted. He did not rely on the protection of castle walls. He came equipped with a mobile fortress, one that could detect intrusion, repel curses, and perhaps even shift its contents based on magical conditions. The cinematic omission of these details is understandable in the rush of adaptation, but regrettable. The film reduces Lupin's introduction to a sleepy ride on the Hogwarts Express and a single lesson on boggarts. The deeper symbolism of the suitcase, the quiet testimony to his past and his pragmatism, is lost. It flattens his character into that of a kind mentor rather than a complex warrior who has learned to survive with cunning and grace. In the book, we are shown glimpses of how seriously Lupin takes his role as educator. He does not entertain with bravado or distract with glitter. He equips. When Snape replaces him for a lesson and assigns students a tedious essay on werewolves, Lupin returns and immediately lifts their spirits with plans for practical learning. He knows that education, especially in defense, must be grounded in reality. That same realism pervades his belongings. The suitcase is not a teaching prop, it is a lifeline. One can imagine what might be found inside. Anti-vampire wards, perhaps derived from garlic, and defensive runes. Silver-lined gloves for handling cursed objects. A mirror, like Sirius Black's, used for silent communication. Books bound in dragon hide detailing encounters with Lethifolds, Kappas, and Hinkypunks. And possibly a journal, encoded of course, where Lupin recorded his travels, his transformations, his allies and enemies. He was a marauder, after all. The habit of documentation and magical customization ran deep in him. The trunk may have even contained artifacts from his time with James Potter and Sirius Black. Magical maps, remnants of pranks, items only meaningful to those who once roamed Hogwarts halls under the names of Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. To a casual observer, it's just a suitcase. To someone who knows where to look, it's a vault of history and identity. The locks, enchantments, and autonomous defenses would not have been placed lightly. Lupin, aware of the stigma and threat that followed him as a werewolf, could never afford to leave himself exposed. The magical community was often unforgiving, and ministry agents had been known to overstep their bounds in pursuit of dangerous creatures. His suitcase wasn't a matter of luxury, it was necessity. In some ways, the suitcase embodies Lupin's philosophy of defense. Quiet, thorough, unassuming on the surface, but deeply prepared. He teaches students not just to cast spells, but to think ahead, to see the boggart for what it is, a trick of fear. In the same way, he arms himself not with aggression, but with layered defense. It's a subtle lesson one the film adaptation loses entirely. The most striking aspect of this omission is how it changes the audience's perception. Viewers of the movie see a kindly professor with a mysterious illness. Readers of the book see a seasoned practitioner of defensive magic, a man whose very presence demands respect not for showmanship, but for restraint and thoughtfulness. The suitcase is the physical embodiment of that restraint. That's a weapon only in the most defensive of senses. The trunk also hints at the double life Lupin is forced to live. At school, he is a teacher and mentor, but in the wizarding world beyond, he is marked. The suitcase travels with him because no place is ever truly safe. It allows him to disappear if necessary, to fight if cornered, and to survive on the margins. Its autonomy, the snapping lid, the self-sorting compartments, makes it a companion as much as a tool. It's worth noting that the suitcase's nature is never fully explored even in the book. But that's precisely what makes it so intriguing. Rowling leaves just enough detail to suggest richness, enough to let the imagination work. And what the imagination finds is a story of a man who prepared for every outcome, not because he was paranoid, but because life had taught him that anything less was foolish. One can almost picture Lupin in a borrowed room, hunched over his suitcase, casting spells long into the night. Wards against tracking, anti-curse glyphs, triggers that would set off decoys if tampered with. A werewolf with nothing to lose might lash out. But Lupin, ever the strategist, chose instead to plan and prepare and endure. This suitcase, so briefly glimpsed in the film, should have been a character in itself, a silent sentinel of everything Lupin had been through, from childhood attacks to Hogwarts adventures to the quiet horrors of isolation and poverty. Every charm sewn into its frame was another reminder: trust little, prepare well, and protect what matters. When he finally leaves the school after his identity is exposed, Rowling notes that the suitcase behaves reluctantly. It snapped shut with a final thud, as though resentful. That sentence is more than poetic whimsy. It reveals that Lupin's suitcase, like his teaching, is infused with purpose. It has seen battles, it knows its master's burdens. To overlook this in adaptation is to miss a fundamental truth about Lupin. He was not simply a good teacher, he was a survivor, a warrior of quiet means, and his tools were forged from necessity, not vanity. The suitcase isn't just a magical item, it's a symbol of resistance, of survival, of dignity in a world that often denied him that right. Only the readers truly know what it means when that lid snaps shut one last time. Number 23. Why Dementors affected Harry so much. Dementors are perhaps the most terrifying creatures introduced in the Harry Potter series. Cloaked in shadows, unseen beneath their hoods, they drift through the air like phantoms, draining hope and warmth from every soul in their path. When Harry encounters them for the first time in The Prisoner of Azkaban, the effect is almost immediate and brutal. He faints. But what's more alarming is not the physical reaction, it's the sound. While others feel cold or weak, Harry hears a woman screaming, pleading for someone to spare her child's life. This is not fear. This is memory. And it's not just any memory, it's the echo of death. In the film adaptation, the moment is dramatic, but strangely empty. We see Harry collapse, we hear a distant cry, we see Lupin rush to help. But what we don't get is the harrowing depth of Harry's trauma, how the Dementors are not simply attacking his nerves, but something far deeper. In the book, J.K. Rowling offers an explanation that the film fails to even hint at. Dementors feed on your worst experiences. They are not simply monsters of fear, but predators of suffering. Harry, unlike almost every other student at Hogwarts, has a lifetime of suffering condensed into a single, searing wound, and that is what makes him so vulnerable. It's not just that Harry lost his parents, it's how he lost them. At 15 months old, he was the sole witness to the murder of his mother and father, the echo of Voldemort's curse, Lily Potter's scream of sacrifice, the flash of green light. These became imprinted on his soul before he could speak. While most students fear detention or failing grades, Harry carries the weight of his mother's last breath. And when the Dementors draw near, they do not find mild fear or adolescent worries. They find the raw, unfiltered scream of a mother dying to save her son. In Chapter 10 of The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling writes, "I can hear my mum screaming when the Dementors get too near me." This quote, brief as it is, reveals the crux of Harry's vulnerability. Dementors are not just terrifying because they remove joy. They are terrifying because they leave you with nothing but your worst moment, endlessly looping. For Harry, that loop is more tragic than most could imagine. No wonder he collapses while others merely tremble. Professor Lupin, one of the few adults who treats Harry with honesty and kindness, offers him an explanation that the films never explore. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," he tells Harry. "When they get near me, I can hear Voldemort murdering my mum." Lupin understands in a way others do not. He knows that Harry's exposure to trauma is not only rare, it's almost unprecedented among his peers. This is not a matter of courage or strength, it is a matter of wounds. What deepens the tragedy is how alone Harry feels in these moments. Other students whisper about how he faints, how he cannot handle the Dementors. Even Draco Malfoy, ever eager to wound, mocks him for it with dramatic swoons. But what they don't know, and what the film barely hints at, is that Harry's reactions are not weakness. They are the mark of a soul that has been broken and barely repaired. They are the echo of horrors the others have never even imagined. Rowling's depiction of Dementors is masterful because it blends the magical with the deeply psychological. These creatures are not simply fantasy monsters. They are metaphors for depression, for trauma, for the way the past can consume the present. When Harry meets them, he is not just a boy on a train, He is a child reliving the death of his parents, the betrayal of safety, the end of everything he once had. And the scream he hears is not fiction. It is the last real sound his mother ever made. The lake scene is one of the most pivotal in the book. Surrounded by Dementors, Harry feels himself drowning in memory. As he loses consciousness, he hears his mother's voice saying, "Not Harry, please no, take me, kill me instead." And then silence. That moment isn't just sad, it's soul-crushing. It is the sound of the ultimate sacrifice, and the one memory that defines Harry's very existence. The Dementors don't invent it, they simply amplify it. And in that, they reveal a truth about Harry that even he struggles to accept. He has known death more intimately than any child should. What makes this worse is that Harry has no memory of his parents beyond these final moments. For most people, memories of family are warm, comforting, filled with laughter or security. But for Harry, the only memory he can access of his mother and father is the moment they died. The Dementors, by bringing that memory to the surface, steal the only connection he has. It's not just pain, they take the very thing he wishes he could treasure. When Professor Lupin teaches Harry the Patronus charm, it becomes more than a lesson in defense. It becomes a lifeline. The charm is powered by a happy memory, a piece of one's soul that is untouchable by darkness. But for Harry, even this is difficult. He must search his heart for something good enough, powerful enough, to stand against the echo of death. At first, he tries using memories of riding a broomstick, and later he turns to the memory of learning he was a wizard and leaving the Dursleys. These are not simple recollections. They are his attempt to rewrite the inner script that the Dementors force him to replay. When Harry finally casts a full Patronus, he doesn't just fend off the Dementors, he makes a statement that despite the weight of grief and loss, there is still something worth holding on to. That joy, no matter how small or fragile, has the power to resist darkness. In many ways, the Patronus charm becomes Harry's answer to trauma. He cannot erase what happened, but he can protect himself from being consumed by it. It's no coincidence that Harry's Patronus takes the form of a stag, his father's Animagus form. In a way, James Potter comes to his son's rescue once again, not as a ghost, but as the embodiment of love and memory. The films show the Patronus as a visual spectacle, but in the book it's a symbol of Harry reclaiming agency over his past. The boy who was once the helpless target of a killing curse is now the one who drives back the shadows. That transformation is emotional, not just magical. Rowling never allows Harry to forget the power Dementors hold over him. Even in later books, their presence continues to evoke fear and sorrow. But in The Prisoner of Azkaban, that vulnerability is most raw. And it is Lupin, himself a man scarred by his own condition, who understands this best. When he tells Harry, "You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble?" He is reminding him that pain and memory are intertwined, but not undefeatable. The tragedy is that the films, in their need for pace and spectacle, sideline this profound emotional journey. The screaming, the memory, the very idea that Harry is reliving his mother's death, these are only lightly touched upon. Viewers who haven't read the book might assume Harry is simply weaker than his classmates, but readers know the truth. They know that he is not weak at all. He is simply carrying more than most. This hidden detail about the Dementors also reshapes how we view Harry as a hero. His courage is not in wand work or duels. It lies in his ability to stand time and again before creatures that force him to relive his worst moment and to survive. While others recoil from fear, Harry is swallowed by grief. And still, he returns. That is the quiet heroism that makes The Prisoner of Azkaban one of the most emotionally powerful books in the series. Dumbledore, too, seems to understand this in a way others don't. While he rarely speaks directly about Harry's trauma, his decisions, keeping Dementors away from Hogwarts when possible, ensuring Lupin becomes a teacher, reveal a silent empathy. He knows that Harry's strength is not just in prophecy or destiny, it is in his ability to love, to feel, to hurt, and to keep going. The Dementors, in that light, are not just enemies, they are mirrors of the pain Harry carries. And yet this depth never translates fully to the screen. The movies, for all their beauty, struggle to show the interior landscape of Harry's mind. They miss the fact that what makes him special is not his scar or his fame. It is the way he bleeds, quietly, invisibly, and still chooses to fight. The books give us that access. They let us hear the scream. They let us understand the silence that follows. Ultimately, the truth about the Dementors is not about fear. It is about memory. And for Harry, memory is not a treasure chest, but a battlefield. The scream of Lily Potter is more than just a sound. It is the defining moment of his life. When the Dementors arrive, they do not bring something new. They force Harry to remember what he has tried his entire life to forget. And that, more than anything, is why they nearly break him. But he does not break. That is the final truth. The Patronus charm, glowing silver and unyielding, is not just a spell. It is Harry's refusal to surrender to darkness. It is the light of memory reshaped into something powerful, something good. In casting it, Harry does more than defend himself. He reclaims the narrative. The boy who once heard his mother die now hears the thunder of hooves, the charge of a stag, the brilliance of light. He has rewritten the scream, and that is the kind of magic no Dementor can ever consume. Number 24. Lupin was the best defense against the dark arts teacher. Remus Lupin's time as the defense against the dark arts teacher at Hogwarts is one of the most cherished elements in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, at least for those who have read the book. The film adaptation touches on his kindness and capability, but it only grazes the surface. The book, however, paints a much richer picture. Not only was Lupin competent, he was deeply respected, genuinely beloved, and arguably the best defense teacher the school had seen in decades. This wasn't just about his knowledge, it was about his character, his approach, and the way he empowered students who had grown accustomed to disappointment. The classroom of defense against the dark arts had long been a place of dread. In Harry's first year, Professor Quirrell stuttered his way through ineffective lessons, hiding a secret far more dangerous than his incompetence. In his second year, Gilderoy Lockhart turned every class into a performance, caring more for his image than the safety or learning of his students. By the time Remus Lupin arrived in the third year, expectations were low. And yet, from the moment he stood calmly before a class full of skeptical third years, he changed everything. Lupin's lessons weren't just informative, they were alive. He believed in practicality, understanding that theoretical knowledge without experience meant nothing in the face of real danger. When he introduced the boggart in the wardrobe, his class was nervous, even frightened, but Lupin guided them through the lesson with patience and humour. He let Neville Longbottom, the class's most insecure student, take the lead. What would he see if he faced the boggart? Lupin asked gently, and when Neville revealed it would be Professor Snape, Lupin helped him turn that fear into laughter. A green dress, a feathered hat, and a handbag later, and the class was roaring. For the first time, Neville felt powerful. That moment wasn't just comic relief, it was a turning point. Neville, perpetually behind in most subjects, now stood in front of the class, facing his fear. Lupin didn't mock him, didn't belittle him. He gave him the stage and the tools to transform fear into strength. In the book, J.K. Rowling writes, Neville's face went redder than ever, but he looked pleased. The significance is subtle, but for anyone who's ever struggled in school, it speaks volumes. And it wasn't just Neville. Lupin made every student feel seen. He called on Hermione without ever making her feel like a know-it-all. He encouraged Ron, who often lived in the shadows of his older brothers and his famous best friend. He challenged Harry not out of severity, but out of belief in his potential. When Dementors threatened Hogwarts, Lupin took Harry aside and taught him the Patronus charm, not an easy feat for any wizard, let alone a third year. But Lupin didn't question if Harry could do it. He simply said, "You are not weak, Harry." In the book, this private tutoring wasn't just about magic. It was a teacher believing so deeply in a student's resilience that the student began to believe in it himself. Lupin's impact stretched far beyond his lesson plans. After his first class, a buzz ran through Gryffindor Tower. Students were talking excitedly, for the first time in years, about defense against the dark arts. They looked forward to class. Even those who had previously dreaded it, like Parvati Patil and Dean Thomas, now walked into lessons with anticipation. He taught them about hinkypunks and kappas, grindylows and red caps, but more importantly, he taught them how to stay calm under pressure. He made learning about fear, danger, and darkness something empowering rather than terrifying. Even Snape, who loathed Lupin for reasons rooted in their shared past, begrudgingly acknowledged his effectiveness. When Snape took over a lesson during Lupin's illness, he sneered at Lupin's amateurish approach, but the students didn't agree. They bristled at Snape's contempt and stood by their teacher. As the book states, they had never had a teacher like Lupin before. He made everything seem possible. That loyalty didn't come from flashy spells or showmanship. It came from quiet consistency, respect, and warmth. By Christmas, the students were openly expressing their admiration. Lavender Brown remarked that Professor Lupin actually listened when students asked questions. Seamus Finnegan joked that it was the first time he hadn't thought about skipping class. Even the more rebellious students, like Fred and George Weasley, appreciated Lupin's balance of leniency and authority. He never punished to humiliate, he corrected to guide. And what made Lupin's teaching even more remarkable was the secret he carried. He was a werewolf, something that could have brought fear and stigma. But he never let it define him or interfere with his role. When his condition was eventually exposed, it wasn't because of negligence, but betrayal. Still, even then, the reaction from students was telling. They weren't afraid, they were heartbroken to lose him. Hermione Granger, perhaps the brightest witch in the year, protested his resignation. Harry was devastated. Ron was furious. It wasn't just that they were losing a good teacher, they were losing a mentor. Lupin's resignation marked a turning point in the series, not just for the students, but for readers. It reminded us how rare it was to find someone who could teach without ego, lead without domination, and inspire without manipulation. In a world of magical chaos, Lupin was a constant, steady, fair, and profoundly human. What makes Lupin's excellence so poignant is the contrast with what came before and after. Lockhart was a fraud. Quirrell was a puppet for Voldemort. Moody, who turned out to be Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, was effective but terrifying. Umbridge was cruel. Snape, brilliant but cold. Against all of them, Lupin stands alone. He neither frightened his students nor tried to dazzle them. He simply taught, and he taught brilliantly. The Patronus lessons with Harry were a masterclass in mentorship. Lupin didn't just show Harry how to cast a difficult charm, he helped him understand the emotional strength required to do so. The Patronus is a kind of positive force, Lupin explained, a projection of the very things that the Dementor feeds upon: hope, happiness, the desire to survive. These weren't just magical instructions, they were life lessons. Lupin was teaching Harry how to hold on to joy even in the darkest moments. In this way, Lupin helped shape the man Harry would become. The respect Lupin garnered wasn't temporary. Years later, even in the final battle, characters remembered him with admiration. Tonks, who would later fall in love with him, respected him long before their romance. Students like Ginny Weasley and Luna Lovegood carried forward the values he instilled. And when Harry named his own son Teddy Lupin, it was more than sentiment, it was legacy. A tribute to a man who taught without seeking glory and led without demanding loyalty. It's telling that Harry, reflecting on his years at Hogwarts, considered Lupin not only the best defense teacher, but one of the best teachers he ever had, and not just for spells, but for compassion, for kindness, for seeing the best in people when others had given up on them. The quote from the book says it all. He was the only teacher who had ever made Harry feel safe. The film adaptation, though visually stunning and narratively strong, fell short of capturing this emotional depth. David Thewlis portrayed Lupin with a quiet grace, but the script gave him little room to show the full scope of his impact. The movie hinted at his mentorship, but it never fully explored how deeply he changed the culture of learning at Hogwarts. He became a background presence, rather than the beacon of hope and strength that the book portrayed so vividly. In omitting those layers, the film lost something essential. Viewers unfamiliar with the book might assume Lupin was just another good teacher in a line of strange ones, but readers know better. They know Lupin wasn't merely good, he was transformative. He was the teacher every student dreams of, firm but kind, smart but humble, brave but gentle. The respect Lupin earned didn't come from fear, obligation, or charisma. It came from integrity. When he spoke, students listened, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And when he left, they mourned, not because they were scared of who might come next, but because they knew something irreplaceable was gone. For readers, Remus Lupin's tenure at Hogwarts remains one of the series' most moving subplots. He didn't just teach magic, he taught resilience, understanding, and empathy. He offered a model of leadership that didn't rely on force or fear, but on trust and quiet strength, and for that, he remains undisputedly the best defense against the dark arts teacher Hogwarts ever had. Number 25. Scabbers lived with the Weasleys for years. Everyone remembers the scene, Ron Weasley chasing his rat through the chaos of the Shrieking Shack, shouting, "Scabbers, come back!" as the tension between Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Severus Snape reaches a breaking point. But what many fans who only watched the movie never truly grasped was the sheer horror hiding behind that rat's dull little eyes. The film tells you that Scabbers was a pet. The book tells you he was a traitor. For over a decade, Peter Pettigrew, murderer, coward, and Death Eater, slept, ate, and lived inside the Weasley household, masquerading as a harmless pet rat named Scabbers. The implications of this fact are chilling and only fully revealed in the book version of The Prisoner of Azkaban. When Percy Weasley received Scabbers as a pet, no one suspected that this rodent had once been a man, and a man with blood on his hands. Later passed down to Ron, the rat was a lazy, rather unimpressive creature, missing a toe, prone to lethargy, and wholly unremarkable. But what Ron and his family never realized was that they had unknowingly invited a Death Eater into their home, trusted him, fed him, and let him listen to their most private conversations. As J.K. Rowling wrote, Ron's rat was sprawled on his bed, licking his paws, apparently asleep. Harmless, perhaps, but what if those eyes were only pretending to be shut? Peter Pettigrew's transformation into Scabbers wasn't simply a clever disguise. It was the act of a desperate man who had committed unforgivable crimes. After betraying James and Lily Potter to Lord Voldemort, leading directly to their deaths, Peter faked his own death and escaped in his Animagus form. He cut off his own finger, blasted a street apart, and left Sirius Black, his best friend, framed for murder. He scurried away from the wreckage like the rat he had become and began his second life not as a hunted man, but as a child's pet. This wasn't a few months of hiding. It wasn't a brief, transitional stage. Peter lived with the Weasleys for 12 years. 12 years of family dinners, Christmas mornings, and late-night chats by the fire. He was there when Fred and George went to Hogwarts. He was there when Ginny was born. He slept in Ron's bed, sat in his pocket, and rode in the Hogwarts Express. It was no coincidence that Peter sought out a wizarding family. He needed the protection, the cover, and the inside knowledge that came with it, and he found it in the most loving and loyal family in the wizarding world. The horror lies not only in what Pettigrew had done, but in what he could have done. If Lord Voldemort had regained his strength earlier, Peter had a direct line to the boy who lived. He heard the Weasleys speak of Harry long before the boy even knew he was a wizard. He knew the layout of the burrow, the location of Harry's allies, and the details of Dumbledore's movements. Every secret, every plan, every vulnerable moment, Peter was there, quiet and watchful, always listening. He was the ultimate spy, and no one suspected him. In the book, Sirius Black spells it out with the rage of a betrayed man. He's been hiding for 12 years in the house of a wizarding family, listening to all their secrets. He could have killed Harry. He could have brought you-know-who back long ago. Sirius wasn't being dramatic. He was stating the plain truth. Peter Pettigrew was a ticking time bomb tucked into Ron Weasley's robes, and no one knew it. The book makes clear what the film merely suggests. When Ron insists that Scabbers is just a rat, Sirius answers coldly, "That's not a rat! That's not a rat at all!" And he was right. The creature that had shared a home with Arthur and Molly Weasley, who had scampered across Ginny's pillow and sat on Bill's shoulder, was a murderer who had once knelt before Voldemort. How many moments had Peter laughed with the Weasley children, his tiny whiskers twitching while remembering the screams of Lily Potter as he handed her over to death. The betrayal cuts deep because the Weasleys were kind. They were not rich, they were not powerful, but they gave Peter food, warmth, and safety, and he repaid them by preparing for the return of the darkest wizard of all time. The books hint at how close Peter came to slipping, how he almost ran away from the family that had sheltered him. "Scabbers has been looking dreadful for weeks," Ron says at one point. "He keeps trying to escape." Of course he did. Because the walls were closing in, because Sirius had escaped Azkaban and Remus Lupin had returned to Hogwarts. The truth was chasing him, and rats know when to run. There's something especially disturbing in how long Peter maintained the illusion. It takes a certain level of evil to betray a friend. It takes another level entirely to live comfortably with the family of your enemy, pretending to be a pet while silently plotting survival. In the book, Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, is the only one who sees through the disguise. He attacks Scabbers again and again, sensing something wrong, something inhuman. But the Weasleys dismiss it. They think Crookshanks is jealous. They protect the rat. They protect the killer. This twisted relationship is barely explored in the movie. While the film Prisoner of Azkaban captures many moods and magical moments, it rushes past the emotional weight of Peter's betrayal. In the film, Scabbers is just a minor character, a vehicle for plot. But in the book, he is a symbol of hidden rot, a reminder that evil doesn't always wear dark robes or cast deadly spells. Sometimes it curls up in your pocket, nibbles your crackers, and squeaks when it's hungry. Sometimes it pretends to be your friend. The sense of creeping dread in the book builds slowly but unmistakably. When Ron returns from Egypt in the summer before third year, Scabbers is already acting strangely. "He's been off colour ever since I brought him back from Egypt," Ron says. The readers are left to wonder, did something awaken in Peter when he travelled abroad? Did the presence of dark magic in ancient tombs stir his old allegiances? Or did he simply begin to panic, sensing that his time in hiding was running out? The tragedy of it all is that no one suspected him. Not Molly, who must have stroked his fur as she did the laundry. Not Arthur, who worked in the ministry, surrounded by information. Not even Dumbledore, the wisest wizard alive, realized that a Death Eater had been living among his allies for over a decade. It was only when Sirius broke free that the truth began to unravel. Only then did Harry, Ron, and Hermione learn that the past was not dead. It was sleeping in Ron's dormitory. Even after Peter was unmasked, the betrayal didn't end. He escaped. Once again, he slipped through their fingers. Once again, he ran back to Voldemort, and this time he helped his master rise. In the Goblet of Fire, Peter is the one who performs the ritual that gives Voldemort a new body. He is the one who cuts off his own hand, offering it as a sacrifice. Flesh of the servant willingly given? That servant had once slept in Ron Weasley's bed. Imagine the trauma. Imagine being Ron, realizing that your beloved pet was not only a man, but a murderer. That every scratch, every squeak, every moment of affection was a lie. That your childhood companion had looked into your eyes and seen nothing but a shield, a disguise, a means to stay hidden. Ron never fully speaks of it, but the horror lingers in the silence between sentences, in the moments when he looks down at his empty pockets. In a world filled with dragons, dementors, and dark spells, sometimes the most terrifying monster is the one you never see coming, the one you trust, the one you feed. Peter Pettigrew didn't need a wand to cause harm. He used loyalty, he used kindness, he used the Weasleys' goodness as a shield, and that is perhaps the most frightening spell of all. The book leaves readers shaken because it doesn't let them forget. It makes sure they understand that Peter's evil was not loud but quiet, not theatrical but patient. He survived because no one believed a rat could be a monster, and he thrived because good people let him in, gave him warmth, and never questioned the silence. There is a moment in the Shrieking Shack when everything changes. Harry, full of rage, wants to kill Peter, but he doesn't. He says, "I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers just for you." And that mercy, so rare in the wizarding world, is what saves Peter's life. It's also what seals his fate, because the life Harry spares becomes the hand that resurrects Voldemort, mercy twisted into destruction, forgiveness turned into war. This is the real darkness of the prisoner of Azkaban, not the Dementors, not even Sirius's suffering. It's the knowledge that evil can wear the face of the familiar, that it can hide in plain sight, wrapped in innocence, that the betrayal that cost the Potters their lives wasn't buried. It was crawling in Ron's pocket all along. So when you reread the third book, pay attention to the small things, to the rat who didn't want to be petted, to the shadows that shifted when no one looked, to the trust given and abused, because that's what makes this story more than a tale of magic. It's a warning, a whisper, a chilling truth that no movie could ever fully capture. And it all began with a rat in a boy's pocket, number 26. Madame Marsh, the gossip of Diagon Alley. In the warm, flickering light of the Leaky Cauldron's hearth, surrounded by enchanted tankards and floating candlesticks, a minor character left a major impression, though only for those who took the time to read, not merely to watch. Madame Marsh, the gossipy witch of Diagon Alley, appears briefly but vividly in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. She does not grace the screen in Alfonso Cuarón's film adaptation, but on the page she becomes something more than just a background figure. She is the living, whispering voice of wizarding public opinion, and through her, J.K. Rowling subtly crafts an atmosphere of tension, paranoia, and fascination that cannot be fully captured by visuals alone. When Harry runs away from Privet Drive after inflating Aunt Marge, he eventually finds himself under the protection of Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic, who places him in the Leaky Cauldron to await the new school term. It is during this interlude, before the school year begins and the real dangers of the plot unfold, that Rowling paints a vivid picture of the magical world's state of mind. Madame Marsh is often seated in the pub, wrapped in shawls, clutching her handbag, sipping something warm and probably slightly magical. She is not simply passing time, she is a beacon of gossip, a human wireless of magical society, and her words do what no Daily Prophet article could. They carry emotion, urgency, and fear straight into the reader's imagination. Her presence is not officially announced. She doesn't introduce herself with dramatic flair. But in Chapter 4, The Leaky Cauldron, her chatter fills the space between lines. The bar of the Leaky Cauldron was often full of witches and wizards discussing Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban, Rowling writes. And among those discussions, Madame Marsh is the loudest and most persistent. She becomes a kind of narrator within the narration, voicing what the rest of the magical world suspects, believes, or fears. She is not a prophet, not a seer, but in her own way, she reflects the social weather of the times, frightened, fascinated, and quick to speculate. Though the name Madame Marsh appears only fleetingly in the text, the character identified by fans as this notorious gossip functions as a composite of that role. The woman whose coughs often prompt the night bus to make emergency stops, the elderly witch wrapped in talking about that dreadful man, and those whispering in the Leaky Cauldron. Rowling mentions the Leaky Cauldron had become Harry's base for the remainder of the holidays, and he was perfectly happy there, eating 3 superb meals a day and wandering around Diagon Alley. In this setting, Madame Marsh and others like her are always present, chatting over tea and fire whiskey, spreading stories that would later prove dangerously close to the truth. Through her, the reader begins to understand what Sirius Black's escape means to the average witch and wizard. "They say he's mad," Madame Marsh says in a breathless whisper, though not directly quoted. Her sentiment is captured in the atmosphere. She speculates, perhaps wrongly, perhaps with uncanny accuracy, that Black is seeking revenge, that he's tied to you-know-who, that no one is safe. Her voice rises and falls in the background, a kind of musical motif of public opinion. Her tales, exaggerated or not, create a sense of menace that hovers even in bright daylight, even when Harry is simply buying a new set of robes. In film adaptations, much is often sacrificed for time or pace. Side characters vanish and secondary scenes collapse into montages. But in the case of Madame Marsh, what was lost was not just a name but a tone. Her monologues serve as a barometer of the wizarding world's anxiety, their vulnerability, their inclination toward panic, and their dependence on rumour. Madame Marsh, in essence, is the wizarding world personified, full of magic, fear, and endless speculation. She embodies the society that allowed Voldemort to rise in the first place, too distracted by gossip, too quick to point fingers, too eager to believe what suits them. She speaks of Azkaban with a shiver, likening it to a place that would drive anyone mad, a quote lifted nearly word for word from the pub scene. Through her, Rowling gives readers insight into the way Azkaban is perceived not only as a prison, but as a cursed island of despair, where even the Dementors don't need to torture you, they let you do it to yourself. Madame Marsh's musings also provide clues about the broader magical society's lack of preparedness. Despite the seriousness of Sirius Black's escape, her chatter is more about scandal than strategy. She is intrigued, not outraged, frightened, but not proactive. "He must be after Harry Potter," she says, or at least someone like her says so in the Leaky Cauldron. Her words stir unease, but no one truly acts on them. Just as the Ministry remains locked in a state of denial and inertia, it is gossip, not policy, that moves people here. Her stories are not random noise. They feed directly into Harry's own fears and the reader's expectations. When he overhears that Sirius Black may have been Voldemort's right-hand man, it isn't Dumbledore or Fudge who delivers this information. It's the gossipers of Diagon Alley, the Madame Marsh types, whose conversations are overheard rather than officially announced. This method of storytelling builds suspense in a way that few films can match. It's intimate, almost secretive, as if the reader is leaning in from the next bar stool. And these conversations are not always accurate. That is part of their power. Madame Marsh's tone may be authoritative, but her information is often flawed or incomplete. Yet this makes her even more realistic. She represents the magical world's collective voice, often misled, often emotional, but always certain. Her remarks on the night bus, for example, are laden with complaints about its speed and recklessness. She is fussy, older, perhaps fragile, but sharp as a needle when it comes to sniffing out drama. One of the most vivid moments involving Madame Marsh, or a witch widely believed to be her, comes when Harry rides the night bus. The bus stops suddenly and a pale witch rushes off, clutching her bag and retching from the motion. Though this may seem like a throwaway comic scene, it's another example of how Rowling uses even minor figures to breathe life into her world. She gives them idiosyncrasies, patterns, and reactions. And it's this consistency, this small spark of individualism, that turns a world from cardboard to living history. When readers remember The Prisoner of Azkaban, they often recall the grim grandeur of the Dementors, the revelations about Peter Pettigrew, or the introduction of the Marauders map. But nestled within the quieter scenes, the breakfasts in the Leaky Cauldron, the wand polishings, the overheard conversations, lies the heart of the series. A world so complete that even its whisperers have purpose. Madame Marsh is not just comic relief or filler, she is a cultural weather vane, and her absence in the film removes a whole layer of social texture. She is also a literary tool. By including her, Rowling avoids expository info dumps. Rather than have a professor tell Harry everything about Azkaban and Sirius, we get fragments of it through rumour, through tea-time chatter, through Madame Marsh's sharp and sometimes shaky voice. It's more human this way. And it allows readers to piece together the puzzle alongside Harry, not before him. Madame Marsh tells us what the Daily Prophet doesn't dare, or what it spins into neutral language. It is important to remember that Rowling does not mock her. Despite her flaws and biases, Madame Marsh is not a caricature. She's treated with a strange sort of respect, the same respect Rowling offers to all her side characters. They are not there to be laughed at, but to hold up mirrors to the main plot, to reflect what a society under pressure looks like. Madame Marsh is in some ways the magical world's anxiety given form, and her exclusion from the film is not a fatal flaw, but it is a loss. Without her, we are told that Sirius Black is dangerous, but we don't feel the public fear. We miss the buzzing atmosphere of Diagon Alley before the storm. We lose the sense that even in the bright heart of the wizarding world, darkness is just a rumour away from returning. The strength of Rowling's world lies in its layers. There are grand halls and secret chambers, but there are also pubs and parlours and cafes where witches like Madame Marsh talk too loudly over cups of hot mead. The film Prisoner of Azkaban captures the shadows and the tension, but not the noise, not the communal murmur of a magical world on edge. Madame Marsh, whether speaking about Sirius Black or the Ministry's failures, provides colour, context and charm. She reminds us that every world, no matter how enchanted, is made up of ordinary people whispering extraordinary things. Her voice, sharp, aged, uncertain, echoes through the pages, and those who have read the books can still hear her murmuring, just behind the next door of the Leaky Cauldron. Number 27, Arthur Weasley's warnings about Sirius. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the emotional landscape of the story is often most vividly painted not through magic or mystery, but through human relationships, especially those filled with quiet care. One such moment, barely noticed by the casual viewer of the film, becomes a centerpiece of warmth and concern in the novel, Arthur Weasley's hushed warning to Harry. What the film flattens into a brief caution, the book deepens into an intimate and almost paternal exchange, rich with unspoken love and a sense of looming danger. It's a moment that reveals Arthur Weasley not just as a loving father to his own children, but as someone who has taken Harry into his heart with equal tenderness. The setting is tense. The wizarding world is in a state of quiet alarm. Whispers of Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban ripple through Diagon Alley, and the Ministry scrambles to maintain calm. Mr. Weasley, usually gentle and slightly bumbling in his fascination with Muggle inventions, suddenly seems strained, his usual lightness subdued. He's more serious than Harry has ever seen him. And as they shop for school supplies, it becomes clear that Arthur has something on his mind, something he's been holding back, unsure if he should speak at all. He chooses a moment when Molly is distracted. Arthur draws Harry aside into a private corner of the Leaky Cauldron, away from the crowd and noise. The gesture is telling. It's not casual, it's deliberate, careful. Mr. Weasley doesn't want the others to hear what he's about to say. What follows is one of the most emotionally charged conversations in the entire book, a moment so filled with compassion and worry that it forever alters the way we see Arthur's relationship with Harry. Arthur tells him the truth that no one else wanted to share with Harry. That Sirius Black isn't just a dangerous fugitive, he's thought to be after Harry himself. The implication is staggering. Not only has Black escaped from the most secure prison in the wizarding world, but he's believed to be hunting a boy of 13. Mr. Weasley's voice in this scene is calm but weighted with dread. He doesn't shout, he doesn't dramatize. Instead, he pleads with Harry to take the situation seriously. Harry, brave to a fault, is more curious than afraid. It's then that Arthur's voice tightens. He says something that lingers. You think your parents would have wanted you to die rather than be protected? These words don't just serve as advice. They're a window into Arthur's soul. They're spoken not by a ministry employee, not even by a friend of the family, but by a man who feels a deep, fatherly responsibility for a boy who has lost his own parents far too soon. The contrast with the film is striking. In the adaptation, Arthur simply delivers a terse warning: stay away from Sirius Black. It's over in seconds, a line among many, but in the novel this moment carries weight. It tells us that Arthur has been battling with himself, perhaps unsure whether Harry should know the full extent of the danger. He's likely argued with Molly about it, who, ever the protector, probably insisted they shield Harry from the truth. But Arthur, respecting Harry's maturity and bravery, chooses honesty. There's another layer to this scene: trust. Arthur could have kept the secret. Many adults in Harry's life choose to withhold information for his own good. But Arthur breaks that pattern. He treats Harry not as a child, but as a young man who deserves the truth. That trust is not given lightly. It marks a pivotal point in their relationship. Arthur no longer sees Harry only as his son's best friend. He sees him as someone worth confiding in, someone whose safety keeps him up at night. This exchange also highlights Arthur's growing role as a surrogate father. Harry's own father is a memory, a photograph, a shadow. Sirius, his godfather, hasn't yet entered his life in a meaningful way. Dumbledore, while powerful and wise, remains distant and enigmatic. Hagrid is kind, but more of a guardian of secrets than a consistent protector. It's Arthur Weasley who steps into that rare space of quiet, emotional intimacy. He doesn't speak with grandeur, he speaks with the voice of a father. The line about James and Lily not wanting Harry to die in the name of heroism is one of the most loving things Arthur could have said. It implies a deep understanding of who Harry is, a boy so used to fighting alone that he might choose danger over obedience. Arthur knows this. He's watched Harry grow. He sees the noble, self-sacrificing tendencies and understands their danger. This is not just about Sirius Black. It's about saving Harry from himself. Even more moving is the fact that Arthur doesn't scold. He doesn't bark orders. He knows that love must be the root of persuasion. His approach isn't fear-based. He appeals to Harry's memory of his parents, to what they would have wanted for him. In doing so, Arthur connects Harry to a past that was stolen from him and reframes the present danger as a moment to honor, not betray, their love. The presence of the Dementors at Hogwarts is also addressed. Arthur doesn't hide the reason behind their deployment. He tells Harry they are there to protect him from Black, but he says it with a clear undertone of regret. He knows how cruel the Dementors are, how they affect Harry more than the other students. He hates that it has come to this, but again he chooses honesty. He gives Harry the dignity of knowledge, of context. This moment becomes even more powerful when we remember that Arthur has 7 children of his own. He could easily have prioritized them emotionally and practically. But in pulling Harry aside, he's making a profound statement. You are one of mine too. Your safety matters to me just as much. It's a moment of unspoken adoption, of emotional inclusion into the Weasley clan, not through words, but through concern, truth, and guidance. The intimacy of the scene is magnified by the location. The Leaky Cauldron is a place of transition, a gateway between the Muggle and magical worlds. It mirrors Harry's own position, caught between childhood and adulthood, between safety and danger. In this liminal space, Arthur offers a bridge, the promise of protection not just through magic, but through love, through mentorship, through the fierce quiet of someone who cares. For readers, this scene solidifies Arthur Weasley as more than comic relief. He's often portrayed with charm and warmth, but here he becomes something deeper, a moral compass, a steady hand. He's the kind of man who might not have great wealth or prestige, but possesses what matters most: integrity, loyalty, and love. The fact that he uses that strength to protect a boy who isn't his own speaks volumes. Harry's reaction is equally important. He listens, he respects Arthur. That alone is telling. Harry, who so often resists adult interference, doesn't push back. He takes Arthur's words to heart. The conversation changes how he views the threat of Sirius Black. It doesn't make him fearful, but it makes him careful. And that care, born from trust, ultimately helps him navigate the chaos ahead. It's worth noting that J.K. Rowling didn't need to include this scene. The plot would have moved forward without it. But she chose to pause the narrative, to give space to this small, deeply human moment. That choice reflects one of the core themes of the series, that love and protection are the real forms of magic. Not spells, not potions, but care, quiet, honest, vulnerable care. The omission of this scene from the film adaptation is one of its quiet tragedies. While it captures the urgency of Sirius's escape, it loses the emotional resonance of Arthur's concern. It turns a heartfelt confession into a passing comment. And in doing so, it deprives the audience of a key insight into Harry's world, not the world of dark wizards and prophecies, but the world of chosen families and quiet, everyday bravery. Those who read the book carry this scene with them like a secret. It's not flashy, it's not dramatic, but it matters. It's a moment that defines Arthur's character and deepens Harry's emotional landscape. It's where a boy without parents hears, for just a moment, the voice of someone who truly cares if he lives or dies, not because he's the chosen one, but because he's a child who deserves to be safe and loved. There's a kind of magic in that, a magic that no spell can replicate, a magic of words spoken in trust, of truths shared in private. And for readers, it's a reminder that the most powerful moments in this series aren't always the ones with wands drawn. Sometimes they are found in the quiet corners of a pub, in the worried eyes of a father, in a sentence that cuts through fear with love. When Arthur Weasley said, "You think your parents would have wanted you to die rather than be protected?" He was reminding Harry and us that heroism isn't just about fighting, it's also about choosing to live, to be cautious, to honor those who died by protecting the life they gave. And in that moment, Arthur didn't just offer advice, he offered a lifeline. Number 28, How Black Entered Gryffindor Tower. In the third book of the Harry Potter series, The Prisoner of Azkaban, J.K. Rowling planted a detail that passed almost unnoticed by the general audience, because it was nearly erased from the movie adaptation. The film only briefly alludes to Sirius Black's break-in at Hogwarts, yet never fully reveals how he infiltrated the Gryffindor Tower. The book, however, unfolds the event like a slow-burning mystery, layering it with suspense, character development, and consequences that ripple through the plot. At the center of it all is an often overlooked student, Neville Longbottom. It begins with unease. The fat lady's portrait is found slashed open, her canvas shredded by claws. Peeves, the poltergeist, relays the name of the attacker with characteristic glee, Sirius Black. The entire castle plunges into high alert. Teachers scramble to secure entrances, portraits quake in their frames. But no one yet understands how Sirius got in, or why. For the next several chapters, this mystery simmers beneath the surface, as the students go about their lessons, while constantly looking over their shoulders. The notion that a murderer could so easily reach them inside what is supposed to be the safest magical institution in Britain is deeply unsettling. What the film glosses over is that Sirius's infiltration of Gryffindor Tower isn't some vague magical occurrence. It's a calculated human act made possible through a small, tragic flaw. The book reveals the key in a line that doesn't immediately stand out. Neville had written down the week's passwords on a scrap of paper and had lost it. This scrap of parchment, seemingly insignificant, falls into the wrong hands. It is this forgotten note that allows Sirius Black to enter the Gryffindor common room undetected. When readers finally connect the dots, when it is confirmed that Sirius used Neville's note, it transforms the entire episode from magical mayhem to a tangible psychological drama. Suddenly the story shifts from how did Sirius break in to who failed, and what does that mean for them? And the answer isn't just Sirius Black or the fat lady or the school's protective enchantments. The answer is Neville Longbottom, a student who has always struggled to prove he belongs. Professor McGonagall's reaction is swift and sharp. Neville is not only humiliated but severely punished. "Longbottom, from now on you will be forbidden from knowing the password," she says sternly. "I will have to tell you each day and make sure you remember it." For Neville, this isn't merely a restriction, it's a confirmation of what he fears most, that he is a burden, a weak link in a house full of brave lions. His self-worth, always fragile, takes a blow that leaves bruises no spell can heal. What Rowling does with this scene is remarkable in its subtlety. In a book filled with magical creatures, time travel, and secret identities, she pauses to reflect on very human emotions: shame, guilt, and the weight of making a mistake. Neville, who had only tried to help himself, who had written down the passwords not out of laziness but because he struggles with memory, is held up as the reason a killer got inside. And although Sirius never harmed a student, the fear, the psychological toll, and the implications are real. This moment in the book also serves as a turning point in the way Neville is perceived by his peers and professors. Before this, he's the comic relief, the forgetful one, the child who can't master a simple spell without causing disaster. But now his actions have consequences. The castle goes on lockdown. Students sleep in the Great Hall under teacher supervision. Trust is shattered. Neville becomes the scapegoat for it all. And in his silence, in his small, hunched presence, during the aftermath, we see the beginning of his internal transformation. The loss of trust in Neville is not limited to the teachers. His fellow students start treating him differently too. He becomes isolated, left out of jokes, avoided during group activities. Gryffindor is a house that values courage, but what happens when one of their own makes a mistake rooted not in cowardice, but in vulnerability? This question hangs in the air, unanswered, adding a layer of realism to a magical story. Sirius Black's use of the password paper also reveals something crucial about him, not just his cleverness, but his desperation. He is a man on a mission, haunted by guilt, driven by a need for justice. To find Peter Pettigrew, he must get close to Harry, and that means entering the lion's den. But Sirius doesn't blast his way in. He doesn't use a secret passage or dark magic. He exploits a weakness, a human one, and it works. This makes his character more complex than the wild, howling fugitive the Daily Prophet describes. It shows he's still the brilliant, cunning marauder who once outwitted professors and patrolled the halls under an invisibility cloak. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are caught in the middle of this chaos. They see their dormitory violated, their belongings rifled through. Ron wakes up screaming when he finds Sirius standing over him with a knife. The book describes the moment vividly. There was a loud, sharp crack, and Ron woke up to find the hangings ripped open and Black standing over him. But it's not just the violence that shakes them, it's the realization that someone breached their sanctuary. The trust they had in the safety of Hogwarts is forever fractured. The school, too, responds with increasing control. Security measures are tightened, curfews enforced, but the emotional damage is already done. Even Dumbledore, known for his calm in crisis, seems more subdued. He tells the students, "You will return to your dormitories immediately. All teachers will be in their own common rooms, and all prefects will report back here." There's a sense of gravity in his voice, a weight that tells us this is no longer just a story about magical learning. Real danger has entered these hallowed halls. Neville's arc in this moment is also a microcosm of his entire journey through the series. He starts as the weakest link, the boy who can't even remember a password. But it's precisely these experiences, these moments of failure and shame, that shape him into the brave young man who will one day stand up to Voldemort himself. When he is cut off from the daily life of his house, when he's treated as a liability, Neville begins to internalize the value of vigilance, of personal responsibility. He suffers so that he can grow.